Good morning and welcome to day 2 of Lifespan's premier webinar event, Living Your Best Life, Aging Well with Resilience. I am Stephen Matsey, Lifespan's Program and Outreach Coordinator and your host for today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And if you joined us yesterday, thank you so much for coming back. First, our apologies for a last-minute change to yesterday's lineup. Francie Newfield, who was to present today, was moved to yesterday's webinar. However, if you missed her presentation, both days will be available for viewing very soon. A big thank you to Francie for her flexibility with scheduling. In addition, we were running a little early yesterday, so we regretted this caused anyone some inconvenience. And we experienced some audio issues with Jamie Cabral's Zumba Goal presentation. However, we have corrected this for today's exercise presentation. We will also be sending a survey to all who attended for your feedback on how we can improve your experience for future Lifespan webinars. However, if you were unable to join us yesterday, we had some terrific presentations and received invaluable information. We welcomed geriatric physician Dr. Elizabeth Landsberg, who shared about COVID-19, the use of supplements, and the effects of anxiety. Many excellent questions were received and responded to during the Q&A portion of her presentation. We were also privileged to welcome Aging Life Care Association CEO Tawny Hamill, who got into the nuts and bolts of care management and how it can benefit our community seniors and their families. Francie Newfield, Lifespan's community liaison and tireless volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association, shared on the importance of self-care while caring with persons with dementia. In addition, she provided many supportive resources available to families and caregivers. Finally, Lynn Knudsen and Sally Bookman of Next Stage Productions reminded us that creativity and engagement are still possible, and perhaps even more important as we age. We were also entertained by one of Next Stage Productions' virtual shows, Ferris Wheel. It was incredibly heartwarming, and I hope you felt the same if you were able to see it. But again, if you missed any of yesterday's event, recording links will be made available for both days as soon as Monday, and we will post them on Lifespan's website, www.lifespancare.com. We will also work on sending them to everyone who registered. So please share these links with anyone you think might benefit from the information provided. Aging service providers have found it necessary to adapt their programs and support of our older adults during these challenging and unprecedented times. COVID-19 has also required us to bring services to our community in creative ways. Today's guests are no exception to adapting to this new virtual reality. Lifespan is pleased to welcome, in order of appearance, Lifespan's talent coordinator and senior fitness guru, Jamie Cabral, who joins us again. We also welcome nationally recognized geriatric care management consultant, Kathy Kress, Vanessa Silverstein from Hospice of Santa Cruz County, Clay Kemp, Executive Director of the Seniors Council, and rounding off our day's offerings will be Dr. Arthur Dover. So whether today is your first day joining us or you have attended both, it is our hope that you find value in the information that they will be sharing. Lifespan believes fervently that whether you are a senior, a family member with older relatives, an aging and healthcare professional, or a care provider, together we can help everyone live their best life every day of their life. Although your microphones are muted and videos are turned off, you will have the opportunity to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will answer as many questions as possible, but if we don't get to yours, rest assured we will follow up with a response as soon as possible. You are also free to come and go as you please. Just use your original Zoom link to come back to the webinar at any time. As mentioned, today's events are being recorded for later viewing and is also currently live streaming via Facebook and YouTube. I would now like to introduce to you Lifespan's CEO, Max Winograd. Welcome, Max.
Thank you, Stephen, and welcome to everyone to day 2 of this awesome event. Yesterday was a blast. I kicked off with a merengue and it ended with a Ferris wheel. and we had a ton of content in between. I learned so much, and I hope you did too. And for me, the favorite part was not just hearing from some nationally renowned experts in aging and incredibly passionate people in our community, but it was also the amazing questions and active engagement by you, the participants in this webinar. So I'm looking forward to seeing an even more active audience today, even more learning and connections today. And above all, just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to sign in and tune in to this first ever event that Lifespan is putting on, and to thank each and every one of the people that have made this possible. Stephen, our amazing moderator, Francie, our community liaison, and as Stephen said, a true champion for us in the commitment to fight against Alzheimer's, as well as an amazing figure in the community, James, who's helping to make sure everything behind the scenes is flawless, and then all of the speakers who have contributed some valuable time and thought leadership to help each one of us learn some new tips and tools and best practices to help not only ourselves, our loved ones, and our community to live their best life every day of their life. It's a fundamental part of the mission and vision at Lifespan, and I know that each one of you are here today because you believe so passionately in that as well. So we hope that you're able to experience another day of great content, of great learning, great connections, and don't let this be the end of the conversation. Please reach out to anyone that you see that is a speaker today, and please reach out to the Lifespan team. We love to learn your ideas and your feedback, not just on how to make our next webinar even better, but find out how we can serve more in our community in more ways. So thank you again for showing up. And I have to give my 2 plugs again before we kick off the event and go over to Stephen again, which is make sure that you vote. Don't be a fly on a wall or a fly on someone's head. Go vote. Make a plan to vote on November 3rd. And make sure that your loved ones have a plan to vote as well. And make sure everyone has a way to get to the polls and has the time that they need. We're even doing that at Lifespan with our caregivers to ensure that they have the time to go to the polls and not be worried about lost wages. In addition to that, please, if you have the ability, and I realize it's a very challenging year for many of us, if you're able to donate to the fight to end Alzheimer's, please consider doing so. Even though the walk was last month, we're continuing to raise funds, not just for the Lifespan team, but for the entire community that's trying to support and fight for the end of for Alzheimer's. And we're looking forward to continuing to see those donations to fund critical research, as well as to drive further community advocacy on behalf of not only patients and victims of Alzheimer's, but their families and their entire support network. So thank you to those that are voting. Thank you to those that are contributing. And thank you to all of you for being here today. And so with that, Stephen, I'll hand it back over to you to kick off this awesome event.
Great. Thank you again, Max, for being the supportive force behind the Lifespan team. And yes, indeed, the fly seen around the world. So our first offering today is, again, Jamie Cabral. I was going to be doing some seated stretching exercises. Jamie is passionate about senior fitness, and we hope that you enjoy this first exercise round to get our day started on a very positive and upbeat note. So let me introduce to you Lifespan's very own Jamie Cabral.
And it's so good to see you again. I'm gonna kick things off first. I'll be back here so everyone can see my feet. I'm gonna scoot up and get our music going. It's a great lineup today. So I want a thumbs up when you could hear my music and you could hear my voice. So we're gonna be a little bit further away from the microphone so everyone can see me. Here we go. Can you hear the music? Good, thank you, thank you. All right, let's start with a big arms up. This is great. Seated stretching can be done at your desk. Analysts, co-workers, another one. We're gonna do this for 5, 4. And on 2, we're gonna hold our elbow. 2, hold your elbow. Good job, hold that elbow.
At first I thought it was
infatuation. For about 15 to 20 seconds. Really
it's lasted so
release. We bring it back up.
now I find myself wanting
Good job.
to marry you and take you home. Whoa,
Release. Hold we all need now is some good hugs. Give yourself a hug.
I know
All the
you
hugs people want to give you. Nice and
send
slow.
me. I know you send me. Honest
Put one arm straight and one arm covered. Perfect. And hold it. Good job.
Whoa, whenever I'm with you, I know
Knees to
when
the
I'm
other side. And balance it out.
Honest you do, honest you do. Whoa,
This one's a little tricky, but I want you to lace your fingers and put them behind your back and pull down gently. This should also continue to remind you to keep those feet planted on the floor. I am in an office chair, so I'm a little weepy right now, but keep those feet planted for safety.
honest you do.
This stretch you should feel through your shoulders and your neck. It's so good for all of us that are computers, for just some relaxation, staring at screens all day.
It's lasted so long. Now I find
All right, I'm
myself
gonna take a couple more hugs. We'll take them wherever you get them
to
nice
marry
and
you
slow.
and take you home. I know you
Good job, everybody.
send me. I know you
Music may pick up in a little
send
bit.
me.
You go at your own pace. We're gonna keep it nice and easy. Reach for the sky.
Send me. Honest you
Reach
do.
for the walls. And again. Good job. Well done. Let's move on to that next song. Keep it moving. Now we're gonna focus our neck. Feel the music, we're gonna take it nice and slow. Look forward. We're gonna go forward and just a slow turn. And then back, and then to the other side.
When the
You're
night
gonna move your eyes and your
has
neck,
come
your head, not your body.
and the land is dark and the moon is the
Now everybody, and I want you to grab your
only
head
see.
and pull it down to your shoulder gently, real
No,
gentle.
I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid.
Beautiful.
Just as long as you stand by me.
Pull
So darling,
And then I want you to
by
pull
me,
in,
oh,
pull in.
stand by me, oh, stand by me,
Beautiful.
stand by me. If the sky
Right?
that we look
Down, down.
upon
Go away.
should tumble and fall,
And a
or
great
the
stretch here.
mountain
This
should
rotation.
crumble to the sea. I won't
Back
cry,
out and pull
I won't
and out
cry, no,
and pull.
I won't shed a tear. Just as
Well
long
done, everybody.
as you stand by
Here,
me.
I want you to get
And
slow.
darling,
Back
darling,
foot. Nice and
stand
slow.
by me.
Whenever it comes to
Oh,
stretching,
stand
warming up or cooling
by
down,
me.
nothing should ever
Oh,
be
stand
faster.
now,
Go the opposite direction.
stand
Nice and
by
slow. And of
me.
course, if anything
Stand
hurts,
by
please
me.
don't do it. There's always an alternative to do. I'd rather you not hurt yourself. One more. I want you to go back to the beginning. We're going to stand forward. And then we're just going to move our head. And sometimes we just focus on the same thing for so long, our neck gets neglected. Beautiful. And then tilt. Little subtle tilt. Beautiful.
Darling, darling,
Pull in.
stand by
All
me.
those people who wish to stand by you.
Stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Whenever you're in trouble, won't you stand by me? Oh, stand by me.
Beautifully done. All right, everybody. Here comes a favorite of mine. We're going to kick it up a little bit. That is the stretch of the day. I'm going to turn off my music before another song comes on. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of this wonderful day and soak it all in. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
You're welcome.
That was incredible. That. You know, speaking my language when you're playing that music, definitely hearkening me back to my days of my youth. Yes, I know I look much younger than I probably appear. But again, I want to thank Jamie for joining us again today and demonstrating that any movement is good for our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. And again, simply loved those musical selections. I hope your blood is pumping and getting ready for another tremendous day here at Lifespan with our Living Your Best Life, Aging Well with Resilience webinar. Next up, I am truly honored to introduce this next presenter, Kathy Kress. Kathy is a nationally recognized geriatric care management consultant and author. She holds an MSW in Planning, Administration, and Organization in Aging from UC Berkeley. And her handbook of geriatric care management is in its 4th edition, although I think that might have been changed to 5, but I'll let Kathy clarify that. Kathy will speak about preventing loneliness, isolation, and depression in seniors during these most challenging times. Welcome to the Lifespan webinar, Kathy.
Mute myself. Unmute myself. Okay, I'm trying to follow directions. Welcome thank you so much, Jamie, for letting me rock out a little bit too. And we are going to start the webinar now. So James, you can move to the first slide. There you go. Okay. I'm going to talk about something that, really Dr. Landsberg really talked about a little bit yesterday, and I think we're on sort of the same page. Preventing loneliness, isolation, depression in seniors in turbulent times. Now, what's happening right now? Coronavirus, you can see that. It's spreading all over the country now. We have more cases now on Watsonville for people who are watching from here. So it's coming back in our little county. And at this point, we have a very contentious election that is making everyone nervous, including seniors who have gotten not great care during this whole time. Especially in Santa Cruz, they've gotten great care, but there are places that really hasn't happened. And on top of it, we are, in our last, a month ago, a quarter of our county burned down. So you put all that together, anxiety just really, really hangs over us. And that leads to depression, it leads to isolation. And what happened out of COVID, older people are essentially isolated now. So I'm going to talk about that and talk about, how you can fix it. And we can get to the next slide now. Okay, this is a true statistic. Loneliness is as deadly as smoking. Really, really true. And, I just have a little, footnote here. The Journal of Psychiatric Psychiatry did a study on 3,000 people, older people, 57 to 80, and showed that increased isolation, which seniors are doing right now, and generally they do because, they're older, they have disabilities, is predictive of severe depression and anxiety and actually death. Clinical depression can lead to death. So what can we do to change that? And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, this is where what I want to really talk about comes in. What can we do? We can do something that has really started and it was a passion for me in geriatric care management, which I teach and consult with. and work at Lifespan with. And I was actually one of the founders of Lifespan many, many years ago, 35 years ago, and have come back to it. And quality of life was really a passion of mine then. And it's a whole new way to look at aging. And what is it? It's connectedness. It's social interaction. We as human beings are animals. We like to be in a pack. You know, I have canaries out in my, I have a giant aviary, and they like to be in a flock. I have chickens in the back that like to be in a flock. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, my chickens. And they just stay together just like this. We are just like animals. In fact, we are an animal, and we need that social connection, that being together like Sandy and Ruth are, my chickens. And so you can put the slide back. Come on, I need the slide back. Come on, there you go. So we can bring that connection back through something called quality of life. And pre-COVID, and I want to really stress this because I'm going to do pre-COVID and during COVID now. It can be done, and we have a wonderful program here called Wellbeing at Lifespan that I actually began because it's a passion of mine, and it's something that's really beginning throughout the country. There's 2 main geriatric care management agencies that are doing it, both on the West Coast. Pre-COVID, what we tried to do was, how did we get people back into flocks? We got them back into flocks through connections with their family. And you can see these people are standing outside, that's either grandchildren or, you know, a mom and her grandchildren, or her, you know, her children. But now during COVID, how do older people see the children they adore, their grandchildren? Through glass doors or little windows in nursing homes, and their children. And so older people are really isolated, even more than they ever were before. And we can move to the next slide. So quality of life, I'm going to go through it really quickly in terms of the ways that we can re-engage people, and then talk about holistic quality of life and how you, if you are an adult child, might be able to do it yourself, or you can look into the well-being program here. So it's engagement in activities, and you just saw Jamie doing this. So, you know, if you could do it along with her, you can certainly do this and help your older family member do that, or a client. So it's engagement in activities that promote actually what happens, and Dr. Landsberg talked a lot about this yesterday. What happens is that out of activities, something called endorphins, you know, are started in your body. And what do endorphins do? They make you happy. You know, you run and you run and you run, and then literally your body, it makes you feel euphoric. And that can happen just by doing chair exercises that she was doing with the music that we all love. A certain generation, you could hear I was kind of rocking out during that. But, you know, that's the first part of quality of life. And the second part, we can move to the next slide, is stimulation of the mind. And that's learning. And learning, because quality of life is really different from everybody. And what we do here at Lifespan is we do a quality of life assessment to find out, where did you get your joy? Because adult children don't generally ask that, not because they don't care, but they're worried about the physical ramifications of an older person's aging. But there's a big part that's missing, and that's, where was the joy in your past, and how can we bring it back? So stimulation of the mind through learning is the second part of this, and that's creativity. And you saw Jamie, with creativity, and the presentation yesterday about creativity. We are a city that has the 5th largest artist community in the world, in the country. You know, everybody knows artists are everywhere. We can do everything with them. We may be an artist, or we may be just love art. But, you know, that is something that we really have in our county. So, you know, creativity can happen. And this is pre-COVID over here with people painting together. And there's, you know, tons of artists here. But you can't do that anymore. And so where are seniors? Seniors are isolating in place, but that can be brought to them, just like Jamie showed you with exercise, by engaging them with learning and creativity. For instance, our libraries are open again. You can't go in, but you can go and order ebooks, or you can join Audible, so that older people, when they're isolating, if they love learning and they love reading, can then engage in, you know, in intellectual pursuits again, to make them happy, because reading takes you to that whole other level of you know, a new world, to get away from the, you know, sometimes getting away from the elections and COVID and the fires. We all need to read and escape, and that's what reading does. So that's the second part. And the third part, and we can go to the next slide, is spirituality. Now, what is spirituality? I'm going to talk a lot about this. Spirituality is the interaction with what we believe gives life meaning. And what happens with older people, because they're moving towards death, it might be 30 years from now, but they think, what's this all about? You know, am I going someplace? Am I, you know, will I just go to dust? What does this mean? You know, and spirituality is a really important thing in later life. And so it can be a religious belief where you can see on the left side, you know, part of a church, and it could be a synagogue, it could be the Buddhist temple in Watsonville, it could be the Muslim Santa Cruz Islamic Center, which is on 17th, right near me. You know, and Santa Cruz, you know, the mountains are filled with every religious body you can ever conceive of in camps. So we're, you know, kind of a religious community here. And so that can happen at home in isolation. And this person is praying together. But, you know, I'll show you a little bit more about it. You know, you can, you know, Lifespan has a wonderful newsletter, and they can show you through the newsletter, you know, the whole holiday season is coming up. There's many more spiritual events, and how older people can listen or watch without going to church and being in danger of their spiritual community. They can, you know, participate in, you know, in spiritual practices or at home. So let's move to the next one. So what is it? You know, I'm talking about quality of life. This may not be something you're really familiar with. It's in you. It's deeply personal. Those things I talked about may not be what really, you know, gives you quality. Where is joy? Where's the joy in you? The joy is different in every person. And what it is, it's a response to your life's interest, your life's passions, that's based upon what gives your life meaning. And what we do here at Lifespan is do, and this is how I teach it. I teach, you know, care managers all over the country. I teach them that you do a quality of life assessment. And assessments, you know, we talked about assessments yesterday. This is how I see them. It's just like a doctor. You know, a geriatric care manager goes out and does assessments, and they're tests, just like the doctor, you know, listens to your heart, assigns you to go have all sorts of blood tests, et cetera, et cetera. And then they take those tests and they figure out of the test what is the matter with you and what they could prescribe or tell you to do to make it better. A care manager is just like that. They do assessments like the test to figure out what's the matter. And then they, you know, it's like a prescription. I had a doctor, I do a lot of webinars, once say, what do you mean? Well, it is the same. So we do a well-being assessment to find out, you know, what is your joy and how at any level in your aging can we return it to you. So we'll move to the next slide. Can't see it yet. There you go. Okay, so here at Lifespan and in any geriatric care management agency, usually geriatric care management, and when we started Lifespan 35 years ago, it was quality of care. And what do I mean by that? That's improving the quality of ongoing healthcare needs with support like a care manager and also caregivers. And that was Lifespan for a very long time, and it is most geriatric care management agencies. But since quality of life, and I'm teaching it all over the country, has emerged, you don't want to forget joy. You know, where was the joy in their life? Because that can be brought back to, and it's so important. So what quality of life helps older adults stay fulfilled, engaged in their life, despite any cognitive loss or any physical limitations. And that's the miracle of it. So you see this guy, he's a birder. And in a quality of life assessment, we figured out that what, you know, his passion was birds. Just like Clay, who's going to come on after me. Clay is a great birder and takes people out on boats to see birds. And, you know, he's just fabulous at this. That's his passion. And, but what we find here is this birder who thought he couldn't go out and do this anymore was able to get out in the field by somebody from the well-being program, a quality of life assistant, you know, thinking this up, or actually Stephen really creating a care plan, and then taking him out in the open to watch birds. And so it gives him the ability to do what he wanted when he thought he couldn't do it anymore. However, the new reality with all the trouble we've had is that he has to stay in place. So what do? You get a bird feeder. Now, my dad lived with me for 20 years. I'll talk about my dad a little bit. Not now, just ongoing. And he wasn't a birder, but he, in his last 7 years, he lived with me for 20 years, was very isolated. And so we got him a bird feeder right in front of his window. And he loved it. He just loved it. And so you can, even in an isolated area and, you know, sort of, you know, very depressing place, you can bring joy back. So the birding can come back. And that's the difference between quality of life and quality of care. So we'll move on. Now, this is my second part. Health is physical and mental health. They are entwined. It's called holistic health. We as a city and a county in Santa Cruz understand this much more than, say, somebody that lives in Kansas, not against Kansas, but they are not there yet, somebody who's in Arkansas. We are on the California coast and we're ahead of the times. So mind and body connection and holistic health are not, you know, we all know that. And so quality of life, essentially the emotional, the intellectual, the spiritual health are intertwined with physical health. And you can see that when I said depression is as bad as smoking. People actually die. I mean, you know, love hurts. Remember all those songs, you know, I'm dying of love. Well, you know, the Broken Heart says all about that. So, you know, as an example, somebody who's disconnected to their friends, because, you know, with older people, their friends die or they move away or they got, you know, they move up to assisted living, and their families in our society, the families move all over. I came from Atlantic City, New Jersey. You know the Atlantic City story. If you don't, you know, watch Boardwalk Empire. But, you know, all the children who grew up there, including myself, moved away because there were no jobs. And so, you know, when that happens, when older people, their family dies, their friends die, they become isolated and they suffer mental and physical problems. And that's what we want to address through holistic health. So we'll move to the next slide. There are 4 segments, and they're the same, but I'm going to explain them in a very different way, to holistic health, which I know you all know. Okay, the first is emotional. We talked about that. So it's structured into social interaction with families and friends. and who have shared our experiences, because it's like when you go and you visit somebody that you went to in kindergarten. They know everything about you. They know all the stories. They're instantly familiar with you. And so family are so important because you share this history. And you can see this grandmother, and as grandparents, and I'm a grandparent, I'm 75. I love my grandchildren. They're the passion of my life. And I have 10. The 9-year-olds is my favorite now because they're still little. And it can be an emotional connection with pets. I have a dog that just died, Boston Bull Terrier, who I adored. And my grandchildren adored her. And so they will only call me on Alexa. Alexa's over there from the kitchen. And I would put Dutchie on it, hold her up, and she'd try to lick Alexa. And my grandchildren would go crazy because they loved being with her because all she would do was lick them. And that gave me peace within myself because I adored my grandchildren being happy. And that's how you can change the emotional connection. Even now, look, you can see virtually, you can't touch your grandchildren, but you can communicate with them through, virtually. And Lifespan is going to be able to start this. So move on. And now we're going to get into holistic quality of life, mind-body connection. The physical, and Jamie did a really good job of illustrating this. You can, I don't know whether you can play Jamie, but you could play, you could stream on your computer, you could watch television and do it. You could, and this woman is, you can see she's doing yoga through television as she's isolating in place. So this can be created not only just in the larger world when COVID and the fires and everything is gone, but you can do it in your own living room isolating. And that's creating quality of life. But what you have to do first is do the quality of life assessment. And did you do yoga when you were younger? Well, we can help you do it again. Move on. And now we get back to spirituality. So spirituality is really a holistic quality of life that's very meaningful to so many people. And spirituality is actually a whole field in gerontology. There are experts all over the world, and I, happen to be friends with a great expert, Leonie Nowowitz, and she explained it to me because we've talked together many times. And you look at it this way, look at a filing cabinet, and spirituality has different definitions. So the Catholics have a Catholic drawer saying, this is what life is all about. The Methodists have a Methodist drawer in that filing cabinet. This is what life is all about. The Buddhists have their own filing drawer, and things like environmentalists have their own filing drawer. So each religion or spirituality has its own definition, and you have to find your own. Or, you can come to the well-being program and we'll help you find it through an assessment. And you can see this woman here, during COVID is listening to the radio because, like I said, now in the religious, holiday season, you can't go to church anymore. It's unsafe because you're gathering. And so this woman can listen to her, her church service on the radio where, we could have gone to church, but we can't do that anymore. That's unsafe. And we'll move to the next. And the 4 segments, again, are intellectual. I talked about that before. Well, there are activities that elders engage with mentally. And you remember, if you belong to Osher, and Osher's a great program, it's the biggest. There are Osher programs all over the country attached to colleges. UCSC is the biggest Osher program in the country because we are this vibrant, interested, intellectual community here. And so it can be hobbies, it can be learning. And what Osher did, they had the National Theatre out of England, which is just a wonderful theater. And we all used to be able to go if we, just went to the Del Mar and watched it. But Osher had a whole group that went to the the Del Mar and watch the National Theater. We can't do that anymore because you can't go to movies. They're dangerous. And now Osher has switched over to 4 lectures that they're doing through Zoom. And if you don't belong to Osher, you can, sign up now. Or if you do, just, choose. There's one of the 4 lectures. They're fabulous. They're always taught by really famous professors that, USC's filled with. And they now have an evening book discussion group, just like the library, that meets on Wednesday, and just check it out. That's the way that you can bring yourself back to an intellectual experience in holistic life by just signing up in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is so rich in all of this. We'll move to the next one. And intellectual, let me give you another example. We had somebody in the well-being program who had, was a recent widower, and that happens so frequently and it's so devastating. And he and his wife had been avid travelers, and they loved to go to New York. Well, now she was deceased, and we did the quality of life assessment. We found out he'd love to go to New York too. And so this is how creative these programs can be. The social worker, who is Stephen, did a quality of life assessment and found out that there are senior travel agencies that he could be hooked up with. They would plan the trip, but he would be a part of it. He could, just give them what he needed, but he didn't have to go through all the things we have to go through to get on planes right now, because there aren't travel agents, but there are for seniors. And then he took the trip. Well, now we can't do it anymore, but we have clients. One client that Stephen could tell you about, that she loved New York too. There's a lot of New York lovers. I love New York. I'm from New Jersey. So he hooked her up with a quality of life assistant that brought in all these pictures of New York and put them throughout her room, and brought books and showed her pictures of New York. And that was thrilling to her. And it brought such endorphins and happiness. And all that comes from trying to find out, what was your joy? And we can help you do it again. So we'll move to the next one. Go back one. Okay. No, I'm sorry. Go forward. Okay, this one's fine. Okay, so younger seniors, from 50 to say 65, often are very, very depressed because they're recently retired. And a lot of people who retire just don't know what to do without a job to do every single day. And they do become depressed. And so one of the things that we can recommend in well-being is to volunteer. And it used to be that you could volunteer delivering, Meals on Wheels. But now things are very, very different. So for homebound seniors, you can tutor online for new immigrants. You can do that through the Volunteer Center here in Live Oak on 17th Avenue. And you can tutor young children in distance learning. And this is really important. My daughter, my youngest daughter, who's in her 40s, has a full-time job with a SCAN program, which I won't explain, but it's really prestigious and big. So she was working 8 hours a day. She had twin boys. They were both in 3rd grade, but they had 2 different teachers. She almost had a mental collapse. So what happened was she got a tutor. A lot of people in Santa Cruz get a tutor, but here in Santa Cruz, and maybe Clay will talk about this, we have the senior representatives, and they can actually help schools with the tutoring. And doesn't that make sense? Wouldn't you like to do something like that? And Clay's going to be able to talk about that. But even when people are isolated, these things can happen with COVID. And that's the beauty of quality of life, that it can be done in, we've adapted it, which is amazing and wonderful. So with you know, the Seniors Council is where you can find this out, and we're going to move on to Clay. And the group that you can volunteer for is the Senior Companions, who used to go into schools, but now they can't. So we'll move to the next one. And this is back to Osher. And Osher has these 4 lectures. You can see on the bottom, it used to be a cast of millions, like hundreds of people would come to these meetings. Well, they can't come anymore. And so now they have them on Zoom, and they have 4 major lectures right now. And one of them is fabulous, and I'd like to point this out, the Supreme Court. So they have a new lecture that you can sign up for, major Supreme Court decisions that changed America. And isn't this coming up? So Dr. Arthur Rolston, so you can either, you know, apply, inexpensive, or you can, if you're a member, just sign up. And in the, you know, in your home, you can, you know, Zoom this in. So quality of life can be done in all sorts of ways. And we'll move on to the next one. This is my dad. Stories are the easiest way to tell anything about it. My father lived with me for 20 years. In the last 7 years, he had PTSD from World War II. He was in actually Stalag 17, and it was a severe blow to him. He worked every day of his life. However, he had all the symptoms. And so in the last 7 years of his life, he was really isolated. He, you know, wasn't going out that much. And I said to him, okay, because my mother-in-law lived with me too. She got there, she was there 15 years, and she went to the Presbyterian church. So I said to my dad, okay, he used to call me Miss Full Charge. We need to get you out. I explained it all, and you're going to go to church with Becca, who is my mother-in-law. So, you know, churches have buses. They come pick people up. So the Presbyterian bus picked him up, brought him back, and he said, Cass, that's how he talked to me. Are you kidding? I am not a Presbyterian. I am a Catholic. You did not know that I was an altar boy until I was in 8th grade at Star of the Sea. Well, I knew that was true, but he never told me in all his life. This is the problem with adult children. We don't get this stuff. And so I said, okay, you're going to the Catholic Church. And the next week, the Catholic Church, St. Joseph's over in Capitola, picked him up, and he went there for 7 years and adored it. He was losing his capacity, but he loved the smells and bells, because that's what comes back in spirituality to older people. The incense and the prayers. He remembered all that. And so for 7 years, he sat with the same group. They all said the prayers together, and he loved the donuts at the end. And that was, and then, you know, he drove home with a driver who he knew, Charlie, for 7 years. And that's how churches can really revitalize quality of life. And we can move, I just did him. There's St. Joseph's. And this story always makes me cry. I had another agency over the hill for many, many years. And hospice called us and said that there was an older man who was dying, and he wanted to go home. He had the resources to do that. They wanted to move him home, but he lived on the top of a mountain, you know, and Santa Cruz Mountains aren't that big, over in San Jose. And so we said we'd take that on, but we did a quality of life assessment first because he had no family. And what we found out is he was the head of the group that, if you remember, and you've gone over 17 billion times, built the trail from Los Gatos all the way up to the reservoir. He was the head of it, and there were 400 people in this group. So we called the group, who of course remembered him. And this is the part that makes me cry. All of them volunteered for 4-hour shifts for the rest of the time. And so we had hospice in there. We had all the care providers from our agency supporting the family and taking care of him. And we had these, wonderful people who sat on his bed and showed him pictures of what they had done with his trail. And they were there singing to him, talking about everything that they had done together. until at the end of his life, and he died. And that's so emotionally wonderful to me about what quality of life can do. So we'll move on to the next one, and I haven't cried yet. So you can do this quality of life even when somebody has dementia. One of my earphones fell out. Sorry, little blip here. A woman who had mid-stage dementia was somebody in this program in well-being. And she had mid-stage, but she could still really function in some ways. And she said she wanted to maintain her brain capacity. She loved dominoes. We found that out in a quality of life assessment. And she could still play. She could still make the moves. And so, the quality of life assistant played dominoes with her, and she could win. And that made her feel so good. And you can do this with lots of other things that you find. If somebody loves birds, maybe, Clay in the future, he's going to kill me when he gets here. There's this wonderful game. You can buy it on Amazon, Bird Bingo. It's very simple to play with, and you can do that. Move on to the next slide. Okay, reminiscence therapy is another thing that really works well with clients with dementia. We've done this many times. And so if you find out that, family history is really important to an older person, and it usually is, because what we used to say when I was younger, and you wouldn't even know about these 33 records, but 33 records are really big. And if you think of the grooves in the very beginning, that's when somebody has really severe dementia. They still, that's long-term memory. It's still there, just like the smells and the bells were in my father's memory. And so her family and her early childhood were still in her memory. And so what we did was, and you can get this through Amazon, there are prompts that you can just buy in a booklet about reminiscent therapy. And she was able to, the house I grew up in, it's a simple question that comes from long-term memory, do that. But the family went further than that, joined Ancestry, showed her older relatives. She did remember all that, and made a Shutterfly book for her that they could use over and over again because, she wanted to see it over and over again. That's a really great activity that you can do through quality of life. And I'll move to the next one. And spirituality and rituals. Hospice, and I think it's going to be Francie, can talk about this. They have the most fabulous music therapist in the world. I love her, and I know her really well. And music is an incredible thing to use in quality of life. Why? Because memory and music are right next to each other in your brain. And so we had a dementia client who could sing old world songs, and he was also kind of obstreperous. And so there is this wonderful program, Alive Inside, which you just go on Google after this and check it out because it's fabulous. That got headphones, started by a social worker like me, gathered headphones from all over the country and donated them to nursing homes. And so they put nursing homes on this guy's head and played old war songs, and he calmed down and started speaking. What you will see in the Sundance one is a man who has not talked for 10 years. He's been in a nursing home and not said a word. And what the music, and Jamie was playing music that kind of jived with when I was a teenager. The music you love is when sexuality first starts coming around. That's the music that is in your long-term memory. And so he loved Cab Calloway, and they put Cab Calloway on the earphones, and the guy hadn't talked, and all of a sudden he started moving. You'll see this. And then he started singing exactly the lyrics on over and over and over again. When they took the earphones off, he could say complete sentences. Now, it didn't last that long. However, music, this is without drug interventions, as Dr. Landsberg was talking about, brought him back. And so that's another thing, and I hope that Francie talks about this. We're almost done. We're going to move to the next one. And even, being homebound. If somebody's interested in the environment, watch, the Watsonville wetlands is an entire project down in Watsonville. There's specials about that. Bring in books about, I actually love marshes. I grew up in them. If it's nature photography and nature that they really love, National Geographic, they're moldering in everybody's closet and probably going to crash in at some point. Get the National Geographic or Ansel Adams. Everybody knows him because, he's a California photographer, and we have our own Franz Lanning, who, at the Rio does a presentation every year to raise money for the Natural History Museum. You can't do that anymore, but you could look at his books. So we'll move to the last one. So the CDC, when I used to do this, I've done this presentation many times. Nobody knew what the hell the CDC was. We all know now. And the CDC, which is actually a very prestigious, the most prestigious, healthcare institute in the world, now a little traumatized, did a study, before Trump, and correlated social supports for older adults through quality of life. And what it does is it improves your ability to cope with stressful events. It improves your ability to have positive experiences, and it improves your ability to feel like you have socially rewarding roles, just like that lady that could play dominoes. I can do this. It gives you such joy to do it. So we'll move to the last one. And this is the program I've been talking about. This is Wellbeing. Stephen runs it, our great communicator here. And for more information, you can call Lifespan. We've sort of opened up the fall session. And, if you just want to do this with your family, I assume there's a lot of adult children out there. If you want to put the time into doing it, you can do that as well. So I don't know how much time I've taken, whether we have any time for questions, but I'll be glad to answer them if we can.
Kathy, thank you so much. It's always an honor and a pleasure to hear you talk about quality of life and well-being. We're so like-minded on that. And we do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has a question, use your Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. While we're waiting for a question to come in, I would like to just share briefly about an experience that spoke to me while you were talking with a client that I worked with, who was in very late stage dementia, living in an assisted living facility. And I learned through my quality of life assessment that he was a huge Rolling Stones fan. And though we couldn't take him to a Rolling Stones concert, by an iPad, we were able to watch YouTube videos of Mick Jagger rocking out on stage and Keith Richards, and all of his gruffness. And he was captivated by it. He was not very verbal, but I could tell by the look in his eyes that he was absolutely in joy with that. He also had a strong affection for the Beatles. And whenever we watched a Beatles video, he would point to, oh my goodness, I'm losing my train of thought here for a second.
John?
Paul. Sorry,
yeah.
The young one. He kept saying the young one, the young boy. And it was incredible. So thank you again for sharing that, your presentation, Kathy. Let me see if we have any questions from the studio audience. You're getting some accolades from the crowd, though. Wonderful presentation, which I agree with. Well,
Come
if you
on,
do
ask questions. You can do it. If you're an adult child out there, ask me.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask a question. So we are, of course, in the midst of a global pandemic, and well-being services have definitely had to morph to something different. Do you have any thoughts about bringing those kind of activities to folks in their homes in a time of COVID?
Well, we're doing it right now because Ashley, who's the head of the program, and Stephen have opened the program again. And so it can still be done in person. We observe, and Stephen alluded to this, that Ashley did when she was talking about somebody she did an intake with. you know, I teach all over the country, and I have that lifespan, you know, first page on their website that is so clear about all the preventive steps that a lifespan has taken to be able to be safe to go into one's home, and you should look at that. And so we can bring someone in to your home in a very, very safe way. If the family is reluctant to do that, we are moving into virtual, which could be, you know, an alternative. But you know, these, you know, can still be safely done at home. And you know, the difficulty is technology, because as you well know, you know, technology is. I mean, I'm 75. I do okay, but my 9-year-old grandchildren can, you know, do 100 billion things more than I can. Unless somebody gives me a lobotomy, it's not going to happen. So older people have a, you know, that it's not our native language. And so we will be finding, just like Tanvi was talking about yesterday, they're looking into the same thing, into technology that's very easy to use. One of them, I'm going to bring this over, Alexa. Now, when I first got it, I thought, what the hell? What would I ever use this for? You know, I think it's spying on me. Clay was making fun of me the other day about that, because I'm doing another webinar with him. And what it turns out is my grandchildren love it. And so my daughter, that's all they do is call me that way because I have a Mac and they don't. And so all I have to do, it's really simple, is say, Alexa, call Collie, and then calls them up. I don't have to do a damn thing. And then I get to talk to my grandchildren, and you can actually use Alexa for your older person to, you know, to get, you know, all sorts of things that they don't have to, you know, just it's Alexa, do something. And you know, what you have to do as a family or through well-being is really understand what they want to see, like the Rolling Stones, and then, you know, just tell Alexa to do it. And she does it. But there are, you know, other choices that Max is looking into for virtual, but we will be moving to that. And until then, we have a wonderful, wonderful staff of quality of life assistants who do a fabulous job, a really fabulous job. And we're, you know, going to be hiring more. So, you know, I am so excited. When I started the program, everyone was very enthusiastic, and Stephen has taken over the reins. He's done an excellent, excellent job, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. Care managers all over the country that I teach are going to use it. So
Thank you, Kathy. So some people came in very late with the questions, and unfortunately, we're going to be moving into our next presenter. I'm so sorry, but we will get those questions answered, folks.
okay.
I would like to just mention this one. Somebody asked if your presentation might be available for people to look at. I will remind everybody that this is being recorded, so we will be sharing the link with everybody, which will include all of the presenters' PowerPoints that you can look at. I hope that's sufficient, unless, of course, Kathy, you are willing to share that with other people individually.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm doing another one with Clay. Clay's going to kill me through on the same thing, loneliness with Kaiser, that is just being announced now. So I'll be doing it a second time as well. And I've actually done it, you know, all over the country. But I live right here on Chanticleer because I have chickens, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her associate back at my Supreme Court chicken coop. So, you know, I'm always available.
Thank you, Kathy. I am going to copy these two questions into the chat bar directly to you, Kathy. So if you could stay online and do maybe a response to those, I'll post them back to you.
Be happy to do it.
Thank you so much. All right. Again, Kathy, great presentation. Super important to remember that, especially now during a pandemic and social isolation is increasing, to engage our older adults, make sure that their not only physical well-being is taken care of, but their spiritual, emotional, intellectual well-being. So next up, I'm so pleased to welcome Vanessa Silverstein. Vanessa is the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Hospice of Santa Cruz County. Vanessa holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from UC Berkeley and is currently working towards her master's degree in public health at San Jose State. She will be speaking today about the importance of advanced healthcare planning in light of COVID-19. So please help me virtually welcome Vanessa Silverstein. Welcome, Vanessa, to the webinar.
Thank you, Stephen, so much. And I'm really happy to be here. And this is a topic that I really enjoy talking about any time of year and with anything happening in the world. But I think is especially a really important topic for what we're all going through now with COVID-19. I think a lot of people are starting to recognize that we can't always predict what our health is going to be in the future or what potential challenges or scenarios we might be faced with. So being able to do our homework ahead of time and think through really what our values are and how we want to be taken care of can be not only helpful for ourselves and our own peace of mind, but so helpful for our loved ones to know that if they're ever in a position to make important decisions for us, and even for our healthcare team, if they're ever in a position where they're going to be thinking through what we would want, that we've been able to take the time to create a little toolkit for them that can be really helpful in that process. So I'm really excited to get to talk with you all about this, especially knowing what we're all going through. So if we move on to our next slide here. Great. So a little bit of why planning matters. Of course, we know that if there is a crisis situation, that is the most difficult time to be making important decisions and thinking through what we should do. So being able to make some of these harder decisions before instead of during a crisis is really helpful for us and for our family units. And just as we all do life and living a little bit differently because we're all individuals, we all might have a little bit different ideas about how we might want to do end of life and dying differently too. So being able to really think through some of these values is helpful so that our loved ones don't have to guess what's the right thing to do in a crisis situation. So I'm excited that we're doing this because, like the slide says, I do think that it matters. And if we move on to our next slide here. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to talk about two important tools that are really helpful in advanced healthcare planning. And we're going to sort of go through all of the different sections together. And then I have lots of room at the end for question and answer. But the first tool that most people may have heard about is an advance directive. And it's called an advance directive because in advance of when you need it, you get to leave your directives or your directions. So this is an opportunity for you to really lay out two important things. The first is, if I can't speak for myself, who would I want to speak for me? And there's a couple of different vocab words that we use for this person. So depending on when you've seen a form or what you've heard in conversation, you may have heard the term healthcare agent or durable power of attorney for healthcare. Or if you're an East Coaster, maybe you've heard the term healthcare proxy, and it all means the same thing. Essentially, this is if I'm ever in a situation where I'm medically incapacitated and I can't be answering my own questions about what I want being done, this is the person that gets to really step into your shoes and answer those questions. So that's the first part of an advance directive. And then the second part is, let's say you've done a great job, you've outlined your healthcare agent, you know who would speak for you if you can't speak for yourself. The second part of the form here is, what do I want them to say? What are my preferences around healthcare and specifically healthcare at end of life? So that's really the two parts of a form. And we do get often questions around what is the best advanced healthcare directive form. Maybe you have a friend who's filled out one form that has color pictures on it, and then your doctor handed you another form that is called the 5 Wishes, and then you Googled it and you saw a form that was in black and white that said California Healthcare Directive. The good news is you really can't make a wrong decision with your advanced healthcare directive. There are multiple versions out there. You get to choose whichever form fits best for you. I like to say the best form is the one that you're going to actually fill out. So choose whichever form seems most friendly to you and will most match what you're thinking about, and go for that one. There's no extra credit for completing all of them. So do not go forward and collect all the different forms and have many, many advanced directives flying around. I don't recommend that. Rather, choose one form. It's always going to have the same 2 important parts of it. Fill it out and go with that one. But the first part here of the form, when it comes to selecting your healthcare agent, there are a couple different things that you might want to keep in mind when selecting your healthcare agent. So first, it's helpful to know what this person will be doing, what their responsibilities and roles are. And really, the role of the healthcare agent is to make all of the important decisions that when we're fit and healthy, we make for ourselves. So if we're unable to do that, the healthcare agent will be stepping in. So this might involve consenting or refusing different treatment options or medications. It might be helping to select the medical care professionals or the hospital facility that you might be receiving care. They might be using your advanced directive to look at the care of your body after you die, if you have funeral or cremation wishes, and also organ donation. So there's all sorts of decisions that a healthcare agent might be stepping in to make for you, but really the overarching goal of the healthcare agent is they'll be in a position where they are going to weigh what we call the benefits and the burdens of any decision on your behalf. So really they'll be hopefully stepping into your shoes, and when it comes to any of these decisions, they'll really be looking at the pros and cons about what will this mean for my loved one and for their quality of life, which Kathy was talking about earlier. So hopefully your healthcare agent has access to your advanced directive form, but also access to some important conversations that you've had with them. The type of information that your healthcare agent should hopefully know is those values, that quality of life information that your healthcare team might not know, and especially a healthcare team who you haven't met before, maybe an emergency healthcare team where you haven't been a patient there before. They're not necessarily going to know, for me, what brings Vanessa joy, what's most important to her, what an ideal or okay day looks like for her, but hopefully your healthcare agent will know that. And that's where they'll be able to weigh those benefits and burdens, so that if they ask important questions of the medical team, such as, what would this look, if we went through this treatment option, what would this look like for Vanessa in terms of quality of life? Hopefully they'll know what your opinions are on those answers, because you've talked through with them a bit about what's most important to you. And also you've gone ahead and written in to your advanced directive some of those little clues about what's important to you. So that sort of covers the first part of selecting a healthcare agent. If we move on to the next slide. So if you're thinking through right now, who would be your ideal healthcare agent, there's a few questions that we can ask ourselves. So one would be, are they available when needed? A second question is, can they speak up and handle conflicts on your behalf? Do they know and understand your values and beliefs? Will they ask questions or challenge the doctor about treatment options and what you would want? And then the last one is really important. Are they able to handle and make difficult decisions under stress? So the healthcare agent role is really a unique role, and it's someone who is really an advocate first and foremost. So it's important that your agent is comfortable, first of all, asking questions and really advocating and keeping your values in mind. So sometimes when people think about who they have for friends or neighbors or family and thinking who would be the best healthcare agent, it's not necessarily the person who you love the most or who you're most closest to or have the best time on vacation with. This is really thinking through who's going to be a strong advocate for me and who's going to be able to handle that, that role. So I was speaking with a community member, and she shared that she had a great relationship with her spouse, that her husband, they were very close and got along great. And she said, when my husband buys a new car, it takes him 10 years. He's just not a quick decision maker. He makes good choices, but it takes a really long time. And I know that he wouldn't be the best person for me as a healthcare agent because he doesn't make quick decisions well under stress. So I said, that's a great observation. Maybe his best role is to be holding your hand if something were to happen with you medically, and then someone else might be a better fit for asking those questions and having those conversations with the medical team. So these are all important things to think through with a healthcare agent. You are able to have a backup or secondary agent so that if for some reason the first person on your form is unable to act in that role or can't be contacted, you can have some backup people in reserve. So that's a nice thing to know as well. And if we move on to the next slide. So the second part of your advance directive form is really talking about those healthcare wishes. So often what people think about with advanced directives are life support treatments and your philosophy around, are there any circumstances where I would not want life support treatments? And when we think of life support treatments, there's a variety of things that come into play with that. Essentially, it's any procedure or surgery treatment that is prolonging or extending our life. And depending on the circumstances, that might include CPR. If we can't breathe on our own, it might be a breathing machine or a ventilator. If we're unable to swallow and access food in that way, it might be a feeding tube. Or it could include dialysis, blood transfusion, some other surgeries or medications. So when you see on the form, what's your philosophy around life support treatments? This is what we mean by life support treatments. We'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. So if we move on here, great. So really for the advanced directive, it's thinking through what is my philosophy about life support or life prolonging treatments. And this is, like I said earlier, how we all do life and living differently. We also have different thoughts about end of life. So there is no wrong answer on your advanced directive. The only wrong answer is if you don't do it, because that might be that you're getting whatever answer the medical team is going to default to. So that's the good news, that whatever you feel is perfect to put on the form. So when we're thinking through some different philosophies around life support or life prolonging treatments, there's really a range. So on one end of the spectrum, someone might be thinking that my philosophy is really, I want to try all life support treatments for as long as possible. So my goal in my treatment is time. I want as much time as possible on this earth that I can have. And that would be a good thing for your loved ones to know if that is how you feel. On the other end of the spectrum, you might already know, I'm not interested in life support treatments. I would really prefer to, if the time came where I would require really extensive care or to be on tubes or machines for the rest of my life, I don't want those treatments. I would prefer to focus on my comfort and allow a natural death. I'm going to consider that, my time to slow down and focus on comfort. And then some people might be more in the middle of the spectrum where they're thinking, I'm open to some life support treatments if that might help get me to a high quality of life, but I only want to be on them if I'm going to get to a recovery state or a high quality of life. So I'm sort of in the middle with a trial period. So those are sort of the ranges of how we can think about life support treatments. And it's really helpful for your loved ones to know, and your medical team, where you are on that spectrum. Because what happens is, if we don't specify what our wishes are, the default is always going to be for the medical team to do everything. So once they get started on taking care of you, their goal is going to default to Section A, keep this patient alive as long as possible. And if that's something that you're not interested in, then it's a really great idea to have an advance directive and to have a healthcare agent to advocate for you. So if there are any scenarios that you think through, I really wouldn't want to be in this situation, you want your agent to know that and your healthcare professionals to know that, so that they can protect you from doing more aggressive or what you might consider unnecessary treatments that could get you in a situation where how you're feeling doesn't match up with what's most important to you with quality of life. And if we move on to the next slide here. So if you're thinking through, how do I know which of those options match best with my philosophy? How do I determine my values at end of life? There are a few questions you can ask yourself. These might be questions that are helpful for you if you are first starting out doing your advance directive, or if you already have an advance directive, but you're thinking, do my thoughts from 5-10 years ago still match with how I'm feeling today? And these are really great questions to talk through with your loved ones and whoever you list on your healthcare agent. Hopefully they really know the answers to these questions. And how you can tell if they know the answers is that you pose these questions to them, or you've shared your answers with them, right? So these are a good thing to, even if you already have an advance directive, to check in with your agent and make sure, do they still have a copy of their form? And then also just going through these questions just to make sure that they're still, in tune with what your thoughts are. So when we think through some of our values, one great question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to get more time? On the other hand, what are you not willing to sacrifice to get more time, right? And then another question is, what is important for you to live well? So if you were having a really fabulous day, what would happen on that day? So thinking through, anyone who was listening in earlier to Kathy's presentation, for some of the individuals that she was talking about, it might include bird watching, right? Being able to see my favorite birds, that's what's important to me on a good day. Or it might include listening, was it the Rolling Stones, Stephen? It was some great rock band. It might be, appreciating music. For me, you can probably tell I'm a bit of a talker since I'm leading this presentation. So for me, on my ideal day, I want to be drinking tea and talking with my friends and family. That's what's most important to me. And my loved ones sort of know that that's my North Star. So I, let them know if there are treatment options that can get me to a quality of life place where I can still be part of a tea party, then I'm open to it. But if I can't ever be part of that tea party, then I would prefer to not have life prolonging treatments at that point. That's sort of what's most important to me on my ideal day. And it's different for every person, right? But it's helpful to know so that agent can think through, if they're looking at the benefits and burdens of a treatment option, they can really check in and say, okay, if we go down this path, are we going to have enough benefit that, Vanessa would still be having good days? So that's a really nice thing to keep in mind. And there's also a simple fill in the blank that you can include on your advance directive or in conversation with your loved ones, which is, what matters most to me at end of life is. And that's going to be different for every person. But to think through really, what are my priorities, so that your medical team and your loved ones can make sure that they help you accomplish that, and they themselves can feel really confident and good knowing that they were able to provide that for you, right? So it's a gift back to them so that they're really able to feel good about how they were able to love and care for you. Some other elements in the advance directive, that second part with healthcare wishes, are burial or cremation wishes, organ donation, spiritual preferences, if there's any specific prayers that you'd want, or any ceremonies or different rites, or if there's any religious leaders that you'd want to visit. That would be an important thing for your healthcare agent to know. And also something that is, I think, important anytime, but especially important during this age of COVID-19, is thinking through, if you knew that you were dying, if you knew that you were close to end of life, where would you want to be? Would you prefer to be at home or in the hospital? And especially now, it's important to know what those scenarios look like. So we know now that with COVID-19 and the pandemic, if a patient is at end of life at the hospital, they're not going to be seeing their loved ones in person, right? Because unfortunately, we're unable to offer that. And in some facilities as well, loved ones are not able to go and be at the bedside with their loved ones. So for some people that are thinking through what end of life at a hospital would look like, they're thinking, what's most important to me is maybe my loved ones around me, so I'd really prefer to be at home. So that's something that's really helpful for the medical team to know, and also for your healthcare agent to know. And just so anyone who's local, is informed, at Hospice of Santa Cruz County, we are prepared and ready to take care of patients at end of life, regardless of if they've tested positive for COVID or not. So even if someone does have a positive COVID diagnosis, they can still receive hospice care at home with their medical staff and with other members of the interdisciplinary team, like the social worker, the spiritual care counselor. We fitted all of those people with the protective gear so that if someone does have a positive COVID diagnosis, they can still receive that care and that comfort at home. And then the last bit here for the healthcare wishes, there's always going to be a little DIY section, an other wishes section, where you're able to put in what is most important to you. And that's different for every person. So I was speaking with a colleague recently, and who's a spiritual care counselor here. We used to call them chaplains in that role. And she shared that from working at hospice for decades, that what was really apparent to her, because she's such a nature lover, is from going to see so many people in their homes and so many people in facilities, that for her, nature and sunlight was really important. So she said, I put in my advance directive, if I'm ever receiving care, I want to be near a window or a balcony. So I thought, well, that's a good idea. So if there's anything that, brings you joy, that's most important to you, go ahead and write that in your advance directive. You don't have to just stick to the checklist that's on the printed form. You can always add in, information that's important to you personally. And the next step, if you filled out both sections of the form, is to make your advance directive legal. And there's two ways to do that. You can either notarize the document, so have a notary stamp it, or you can have two adults witness it. And that person is just signing, saying, I've watched this person sign and they are who they say they are. So you really get to choose which of those two options, is easier for you. And if we move on to the next slide, we talk a little bit about notarizing or witnessing in shelter in place, because it's a little bit more tricky now. There are mobile notaries that can come in. So if you go to the website 123notary.com, you can put in your address and see who is, local to you. Or if you don't get to a place where you witness or notarize your document, it's still better to have a form that you filled out, even if you didn't stamp it as legal. That's still important information for your loved ones to have. So go ahead and make sure, even if you don't get to that last step of witness or notarizing, that you share that information with your loved ones. Even if you take a picture of it with your phone or give them a copy, that's still going to be helpful for you. So, you can get partial credit in that way, and don't let any of the last steps bar you from doing what you can in that process. And next, we're going to quickly talk about the POST form. I want to make sure we have room for questions. So this last bit here is for sharing your advance directive. You're going to want to go ahead and make sure that you share this form with your healthcare agent, with any alternate agents that you put, your backup people that you put on the form, also with your doctor or your clinic. They'll be able to scan it and make it part of your electronic medical record. Also, you can share this document with a lawyer, especially if you already have a trust document or something like that. And some people will share it with their faith leaders or other people that are important to them, that might be supporting them if they knew they had a serious illness or were close to end of life. And then this last bit is really important that not everybody knows about. We really recommend that you share your advance directive with the local medical records department at our 2 hospitals that have emergency areas in Santa Cruz County, so Watsonville Community Hospital and Dominican. If 911 is called for any one of us and we are rushed over, it's a really great idea for our advance directive to be on file with them, so that they know who to call, and if there's any treatment options that they should wait on before they start putting us on that conveyor belt of doing everything for life prolonging and life support treatment. So on our website at hospicesantacruzcounty.org, we have different forms that you can download. And we also have a what to do after completing your advance directive cheat sheet, which has the addresses written out for Watsonville Community Hospital and Dominican, so that you can go ahead and share a copy with them. If we move on to our next slide here. So hopefully something that you walk away with from this presentation is not only the tools for completing your paperwork, but also the realization that your advance directive paperwork is only as good as the conversations that you have with your loved ones about it, right? So if we create the perfect advance directive and it's beautiful and articulate and it's completely filled out and we hide it in our kitchen drawer or in our filing cabinet, that's not going to be a benefit to us. So if you are thinking through how to have these conversations with sharing your advance directive or having some of these values conversations, I really recommend looking at this website. It's called theconversationproject.org. And the whole goal of this organization is really to help people have the conversation about what are your healthcare preferences at end of life. So they have a whole conversation guide where they have some prompts for you to know how to bring up these topics and how to make sure that you're covering all that you need to cover. And so some of these prompts include, sharing with your loved ones, even though I'm healthy right now, I'm worried that whatever your worries are, and I want to be prepared, or some other helpful conversation starters like that. So that's a good resource to use. And if we move on here to the next slide, there's one other resource that I want to make sure that we cover here, which is this bright pink form. If you've seen it, you'll remember because it's very shocking in color. And this is the POST form, which stands for the Physician's Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. So your advance directive, which we just talked about, is a form that's great for anyone, any adult, anyone over the age of 18, that really covers who's going to be my healthcare agent and in general what my philosophies are around end-of-life care. And then the POST form, it's a physician's order. So it's something that actually you sign and your doctor signs. And it's a checklist that really succinctly covers what different specific medical treatment options are acceptable to you. So this is really a safety net that if there are medical professionals taking care of you. They know what to do and what not to do really in a crisis situation. So it's bright pink on purpose because it's used in a time when this information is really critical. So we need to be able to find it. And some of you may know sort of the unusual directions for where to keep this document, which is actually on your refrigerator. So people get sort of pretty creative with how to do that. So I've seen different signs where they put it in double bagged in the freezer because they didn't have room for their calendar and pictures on their fridge. So, so there's different ways that you can do it, but really the Pulsed form is designed so that it lives on your fridge. And if there's any emergency first responders or firemen that are coming in when 911 is called, they know really to look there for this information. And then the document travels with you to the hospital. So it's supposed to be something that follows the patient. And also your physician will have this on file as well. And if we go to the next slide here that covers some of the sections. So the first section of the Pulsed form is in relation to CPR. And people's ideas about CPR is really personal in terms of what what their thoughts are on would this procedure be helpful for me. I will say that it's important to know that CPR is not like it is on the movies, unfortunately. Your doctor might not be as attractive as the doctors on Grey's Anatomy, and the CPR might not be as effective as it is on Grey's Anatomy. So there are definitely some burdens to CPR in terms of pain and discomfort with the actual procedure, but then also thinking through what the quality of life or length of life of someone might be after they do CPR. So that's something to really talk to your doctor about. Hey, what would CPR look like for me with my current age and my current medical history, to know what the outcomes might be and if those would be acceptable to you or not. And then the second section of the Pulsed form is when it is talking about medical interventions and really the level of aggressive treatment that is acceptable to you. So the first section would be full treatment, which would most closely match someone who has selected that they do want CPR. If their heart stops and they're not breathing, they do want to be revived with CPR. And then they're okay with being in the intensive care unit and receiving more of those aggressive treatments. So that would be someone who is, interested in full treatment. And then there's sort of a middle ground with selective treatment, which they're open to some treatments, and they might have a trial period of certain treatments. And then the last section is comfort-focused treatment. So this is someone who has said that they do not want more aggressive care and is most closely aligned with some of the care that hospice provides, so that the focus is really making sure that this patient is not suffering and that they're pain-free, that they're as comfortable as possible, but that they're not interested in more of the curative treatments or extending the timeline of their life, that they're more focused on the quality, not the quantity of the days. And then the last section is about artificial nutrition. If you're unable to eat by yourself and swallow with your mouth, then what your thoughts are on feeding tubes or some other tools like that. So that covers the Pulsed form. It used to be that was really a form that was focused specifically for individuals who are quite elderly or who already have a diagnosis of a life-limiting illness. But in times of COVID-19, some people are thinking, with all the unpredictability, maybe I do want a Pulsed form a little bit earlier than that, just to make sure that my wishes are covered, because I could be in a situation that I would potentially be receiving more aggressive care than in other years before a pandemic. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into some questions to ask yourself and some resources. I do want to share that there are great forms to download at hospicesantacruzcounty.org. And also, I'm always happy, and we have a team of volunteers that are happy to provide through our free community education program, either Zoom or phone call sessions for anyone who wants a little bit more help or to think through what their values might be. We can help you on an individual basis with some of these advanced directive and form questions. So we're here to help. Thank you all so much.
Great. Vanessa, thank you so much for bringing this vital information to us. I mean, especially now, I think more than ever. And, you know, while you were presenting, you know, the thought that kept coming to my mind was, I think as a society, we're not really guided or geared towards talking about end of life. You know, it's all about being here now and life. And then when it's too late, it's too late. I think we do a disservice to ourselves if we don't engage in that conversation, because, you know, there's a song, no one here gets out alive, right? I mean, that's the reality for all of us. However, you know, advanced healthcare directive planning is super important. I've got mine done. I hope those in the audience have got theirs done as well, but always check in with Vanessa and Hospice of Santa Cruz County if you need the documents and some guidance. They're an amazing resource for you. So we do have time for some questions and answers. If folks would like to use their Q&A function in the bottom of their Zoom screen, we'd be happy to take those. One that came to my mind while we're waiting to see if anybody comes through, Vanessa, was one of the slides mentioned record your AHCD conversation. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What does that mean? Record via, you know, your phone?
So this, I think, was especially important at the beginning of the pandemic when people are worried about not knowing what might happen and not having the time to either get their advanced directive notarized or have two witnesses come. So people were turning on their iPhones and really saying, hey, this is what's most important to me, and then texting it to their loved ones. Knowing that even if I don't have my advanced directive, my closest family is probably going to be in the position to make my decisions for me. So people were, you know, taping themselves, doing a couple minutes just to know, you know, this is what's on my mind. This is important to me, and then sending it that way. So people are getting creative in these times.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for clarifying that. You know, again, I think it's so valuable to have Hospice of Santa Cruz County available for these conversations, and the conversation starters are great. My spouse and I had to kind of have that conversation ourselves, and it's kind of weird because you're feeling great. You know, there's no medical issues you're experiencing, but gratefully they were open to the topic and conversation, and we were able to get those completed.
Good, yeah, and it's as awkward or as challenging as it might be now. You know, we know that it would be more challenging if there is a serious diagnosis or if we are, you know, in a crisis situation. So it's easier to get it done now. Even if it's not the easiest thing, it feels so good afterwards. It really does.
I can attest to that. I agree 100%. And I also, you know, we have to remember our loved ones that may be facing us at our end of life, you know, are going to be struggling with emotions and, you know, challenges of their own, and making those decisions on the fly can be super problematic. So my spouse is well aware that my end of life wish is to be cremated and spread to the ocean, because that's where I feel my most spiritual joy. So get those documents prepared, folks. So I'm not getting any Q&A in here. However, if you have any questions that come in to your mind after today's presentation, feel free to reach out to Vanessa at Hospice of Santa Cruz County. I know she's more than willing to talk about these. And actually, I think I've got something coming in on the side. I do. Let me see if I can paraphrase. Came in through the chat function. That's why I wasn't.
Oh, sure.
So during New York City surge, hospitals were so overwhelmed that they could not pay attention to advanced directives. Can you talk about this and the importance of this, and if at the last minute, can states do it? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, a little bit. I can say some things, and hopefully that's helpful. And if I missed it, I'm happy to try again. I will say that with advanced directives, you know, some people are concerned with, will this be followed, right? If I go through this process and I've thought through all my values, how can I make sure that the medical teams really follow these wishes? And when we think about that, what's most helpful is to make sure that your loved ones and your agents have a copy of your advanced directive, right? And that also we've shared it with our our own physicians so that it's part of our medical record, and also with our local hospitals, really casting as wide a net as possible with who has these documents is the best way to, protect ourselves. And especially if your agent has a copy of the advance directive, that's going to be really helpful. It used to be that we recommended that people, bring the actual paper with them when they were visiting their loved one in the hospital, just to make sure that people are looking at it and that they have the right one. We know now that loved ones aren't able to go to a hospital, but if they do receive those phone calls, it's really helpful for them to have that cheat sheet to be able to say, I'm looking at this person's advance directive. It's dated on this date. I'm listed on the form, and this is the box that they checked. So that's really, the best way to protect ourselves, is make sure that that information is shared. And luckily in our community, we haven't had the same, spikes as some other states. So I'm not sure if other people are really facing an even more challenging time than that. But for us, luckily, it seems to be pretty manageable. But certainly making sure that you have that information. The last thing is, if you are really staunch on certain opinions about life support, especially with CPR, you can get the medical bracelet that's tied to your POLST form. So if you're especially concerned about aggressive treatment in an emergency situation, you can decide to purchase a medical bracelet and accessorize a little bit with your thoughts about healthcare at end of life. So that's another sort of safeguard.
Great. There was a follow-up comment, or question rather, to that, what we just spoke of. What if, because we're sheltering in place, or many older adults, or just everybody should be some capacity sheltering in place, and
Right.
they have not done their advance directive, then they get sick and go into the hospital. Can it get done at the last minute?
Yeah, so the thing with the advance directive is that it has to be completed by the individual. So that means that it has to really be done in advance of a crisis, and someone cannot do it for you. For the POLST form, that's something that if you already have an advance directive, your healthcare agent can complete that pink form, that physician's order, for you on behalf of someone else. You're allowed to do that. For individuals who haven't done any paperwork at all, in the state of California, the law is that the individual who will speak for that patient is the closest available relative, but closest and available is not defined. So it tends to be the person who is, the busiest bee is going to be the person who's advocating for you. So especially if you feel like the person in your life that would probably be the natural default is not who you'd want to be as your serving as your agent, you certainly want to have your paperwork in place. But the reality is, many people do step into the role of advocating for someone without the paperwork. In California, only about 30% of people even have an advance directive. So it certainly does happen that people are in a position where they have to do that guesswork, but it's much easier if we do the paperwork ahead of time.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. A question just came in that's a very, very good question here. How can you do a healthcare directive for someone with special needs?
That's a really great question. And I know that our social workers probably even have a stronger answer than that. I do know that there are certain advance directives that are written in a way that's more accessible for someone who has a lower literacy level, that are in more simple language. So I would certainly recommend doing that. And I'd be happy to provide some more resources around some different tools for that specific group of people, because there are definitely some resources around that.
Great. Again, thank you so much, Vanessa, for taking time out of your, I know, busy day to be with us today and share about advanced healthcare directive planning. Folks, again, just a reminder, get those directives completed and check in with Hospice of Santa Cruz County if you're needing assistance. So a big virtual thank you to you, Vanessa, for being present with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. All right, so moving right along, our next presenter, I'm super happy again to introduce someone I've known for quite a while, one of my, what I like to call lanterns in the community, Mr. Clay Kemp. Clay is the Executive Director of the Seniors Council of Santa Cruz and San Benito counties. When Clay is not birding, he is actively involved in a number of senior organizations. He is a member of the Executive Committee of the California Association of Area Agencies on Aging, serving as legislative co-chair. In addition, he currently serves on Governor Gavin Newsom's Master Plan for Aging Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And we'll talk about how this plan is securing the future for our community seniors. So please help me welcome Clay Kemp to the Zoom video. And thank you so much, Clay, for taking time to be with us today.
All right, I just had to play that little clip since there's been so many bird references. Thanks for having me here, Stephen. It's really a great honor, and it's great to see how well this is going. So apologies for not being on screen, just for some health reasons going on right now. I'm not fit for public consumption. So bear with me with not having the talking face on here. I also want to say thanks to Francie up front for being willing to switch times at really a moment's notice. So that's much appreciated. So couple things here to share. Stephen said I'm going to talk about Master Plan for Aging and probably ask more questions or put more things out there for your thoughts and ideas to take from this rather than give a real, clear direction on what we're going to do next. So let me get my screen share up here. And looks like it's working for me. Are other people seeing the screen? Okay, so a couple of graphics to just kind of start this off. This was put together, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and I've always liked it, which is kind of a periodic table of the services available to older adults throughout our state and people with disabilities and the different agencies and departments that are responsible for each. And you can see it's got a lot of blocks in it. And, it's nicely colored here and nicely organized. So this seems like it all makes sense. But the reality is if you're trying to navigate the system, it looks a lot more like this. And there's a lot of varieties of this particular chart, but I think the message is kind of clear. We got a huge spider web and a huge mess on how to navigate the system and get to services. And that's obviously a problem. I will challenge how bad of a problem it is here in a sec. But I think this kind of sets the stage for, what we're all facing as individuals and as service providers, as systems, and it's part of why the Master Plan for Aging issue was raised. So let me get going on my slideshow here. And we'll jump into this. So here's who I am. I'm not really fond of this particular PowerPoint. It's got too much text, but it'll help guide me through what we want to talk about. So Master Plan was really started when Governor Newsom issued an executive order for the state to create some sort of coordinated master plan for aging. And that was one of the first things he did when he took office, much to the delight of many of us. And the reason seems pretty obvious, the two screens we just saw before, and just the need to provide some sort of blueprint for how to address aging. But the question is that I want to put out here, is that the real reason why? It's part of it. But the true reason actually came before this, and before the election even happened, before Governor Newsom won in actually a landslide, both the major gubernatorial candidates were challenged by advocates led by the SCAN Foundation to make statements about what they're going to do about the growing population of older adults in this state. And we've all seen the charts of that, how fast the population is growing. One thing that kind of blows my mind is in the past decade, the 59 and under population for the entire state has grown it's roughly been flat, while the 60 plus population has grown by 28%. So we have a challenge and a crisis here, regardless of what we do, including if we do nothing. So while the governor has been really aggressive, and I really commend him for his work on this, it was an effort going on from the grassroots level and all of us that helped elevate this conversation about aging. So the model for this plan is it's going to be a cabinet level plan. And what that really means is that in the governor's office, he has a key cabinet level person who works with each of the departments in the state, be it transportation or rehab or aging or health and human services. The governor has an appointee that works directly with each of those organizations. So those members in his cabinet are actually going to write the final plan. Health and Human Services will staff it, and the committee that I was on, which just formally ended, was a 33, ultimately a 34-member advisory committee made up of experts in aging around the state. And it was truly an honor to be on that committee, an incredible amount of skill and passion among the members. And California Department of Aging served as main staff to it. So, you know, mission, it's all got good things, develop a 10-year plan. It got pushed back a couple months because of COVID, but, you know, we want to make sure that it's a state plan, it's something that could be used locally, that it's data driven, and that there's a best practice toolkit developed in how to implement it. The values, we all liked the values that were included, things we would all hope to see, choices for the individual, equity among groups accessing service, etc. Dignity, immigration status not being a factor, family status, all of that being integrated in how we look at things. Inclusion and accessibility for older adults and people with disabilities was a key piece of it. We wanted the plan to be innovative and evidence informed, and wanted to form a lot of partnerships among state and local government. Goals kind of along the same lines, really person-centered and trying to create livable communities with health and well-being for all and equity for all. So, you know, great people on the committee. The committee broke into a variety of work groups. Here's the main work groups that formed. You can read them yourself, but it's kind of the logical things that you would expect to see in such a plan. And within each work group, there were subcommittees. For example, age-friendly had a whole lot of different components. Age-friendly communities as part of the World Health Organization, and they've established 8 domains of livability. So those include things like engagement, transportation, health services, housing, etc. So under age-friendly, it wasn't just one goal, it was a goal with 8 different domains. And that kind of proved true for all the main work groups. The result is this, and I think this is great, but a challenge and a huge question. The draft has 700 to 800 recommendations that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee has sent to the governor's office to develop the final plan. And while that's tremendous, and I think most things that you would hope are in there, or that you would hope would be in there, are included, which gives us a whole lot of choices for moving forward. But the question is, with that many things in it, how do we really get there? How do we have a successful plan? And how do we have something that, starting with 800 recommendations, how do we get that to evolve when, you know, we're talking about a huge document and a huge process? So in looking at this, I've stolen this from one of my colleagues, but what makes a successful plan? What are the components that need to go into successful implementation? So first thing on here is leadership, departments, decision makers, elected officials, agencies, etc. And one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about this plan is going through this checklist, which we'll do, you know, are these questions being answered? And I think starting at the top, the governor's providing leadership, and he's not asking, he's requiring all the state departments to take ownership of devising specific actions for the plan, and he's making it something that is not expected to just be immediate. So the leadership seems to be there, at least at the state level. Are we going to have that locally? I think that's one of our challenges. Rational data-driven priorities and decision-making. Given the expertise on the stakeholder committee and all the participants that will be working at the governor's level, data-driven priorities are throughout this. We want the activities we pursue to be measurable, to be reasonable to meet, and to have positive outcomes. So that's being built into the plan right away. So I think that is a good piece of it. And if we go back a few slides, you could see one of the categories that we're being focused on was data collection. And an important part of that recommendation that I personally was thrilled to see was funding data. Because far too often, data is kind of a necessary evil, that if you're providing services, you have to measure it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when tough budget times hit, providers of service often get caught in this vortex of, do we cut services and make sure data continues to be collected, or vice versa? And when it comes down to, for example, feeding somebody or counting what happened to the people who aren't getting fed anymore, the priority goes to feeding. We need both. So there's a commitment in here to actually don't just demand data being collected, but that it's funded as well. You need a comprehensive plan, and it needs to include the impact of all actions, both pro and con. And I think that is a real easy pitfall to miss. We see lots of innovative or new ways of doing things that change old models. And usually that's good, but we need to make sure that we're looking at existing services that are being changed and see if the change is actually positive or negative on that rollout of change. So I think it's a very important part in measuring the success. And then number 4, stakeholder input, local, formal, and informal. The stakeholder input in part was the committee that I was on. So that was done quite well, I would say. I think the question on here is the local piece of it. How do all of us, how does our community make sure that we continue to have input as this project goes forward? And then lastly, accountability. It's great that we wrote a plan, and it's great the governor's office is going to finalize that plan, but is it going to be a plan that sits on a shelf and gathers dust and is considered a great piece of research and no action happens on it? The Stakeholder Advisory Committee, I think, we're saying over and over that our work actually starts now. We've written this or made recommendations to what should go into it. So the tough part is, how do we actually get to implementation? And I'm pleased that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee has decided that what we want to do is continue to meet as a group with or without government support, so that we can make sure this accountability takes place on the state level, and to make sure that our skills and passion, and in some cases expertise, are utilized by the governor's office and the rest of the state. A big part of that, though, of course, was how do we do that locally? And I think that's the challenge and a question that all of us have to address, is what are we going to do to make this a reality? So this is kind of what I just said. How do we make sure it's used, and how do we make sure the departments are going to be accountable? And locally, how do we do the same? So these are really questions for all of you, as much as for any of us. And a lot of you have heard me say this before, and I'm going to say it again, that everybody on this call, we're the local experts in aging. It's us. And far too often, and I've done this throughout my career, I wait for some expert to step up and say, oh, we need to do X, Y, and Z, or why isn't this done? And then finally dawned on me that I'm one of those people that need to be saying that. And it's true of everyone here. If we don't do it, who does? And where do we do it, I think, is the great question. There is a statewide effort going on with this, and I'll share the website on that. But I think all of us need to elevate this conversation on an ongoing basis and ask, what do we do to implement our favorite pieces of this proposal and make sure they move forward? And one of the big challenges of that are, if there's 700 or 800 recommendations, that to me is overwhelming. There's no way that we can champion all 800. So I think when the final plan comes out, we need to take the things that are already our local priorities and try to elevate those and move them forward. And we should move that forward among our friends, among chambers of commerce, among local and state electeds. And while that might seem daunting, it's really not. All you have to do is just ask the question, what's being done to implement the master plan for aging in California or in Santa Cruz or Monterey or wherever we happen to be? Just asking that question will elevate the discussion and help move it forward. Costs, of course, have to be addressed. How do we afford new programs? We know programs don't come cheap. But one thing to remember is that we actually, as we've been seeing the last 2 days, there's a wealth of services and approaches to making aging a much more positive experience that are already out there that work. Some are well funded, some don't even need funding. It's individual efforts, and others are just adequate support for what's there. One thing that happened at the first meeting of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee was the Department of Finance made a presentation to everybody and immediately tried to take the wind out of everyone's sails by announcing there's no money to implement anything. The state is broke. And now remember, this was pre-COVID. The state was anything but broke at the time. The state had maximum reserves, a budget surplus, etc. But despite all of that, Department of Finance was still telling everyone, we're broke, don't expect any money to do this. So the counter to that, and obviously it's a very different world post-COVID and in the current economic crisis we're in, but the reality is that if the population is going to double and we do nothing, the cost of doing nothing is going to double what we're spending right now on aging and adult services. And that's true locally, it's true by city, it's true by the state, it's true by the country. So the question really, to me, isn't can we afford it? The question is, can we afford not to do anything? And this is the question Department of Finance needs to be challenged with and pushed by all of us in the legislature. And that is, what is your cost analysis of the amount of dollars you'll be spending on aging services throughout the state, given no change to the current system except population growth? That figure never comes out, and we have to push and demand that be provided. So once we see that figure, we know it's going to be significantly larger than the current state investment. Let's take the dollars that are by default going to be in the state budget and figure out how to spend it most effectively. So moving forward in some key elements to look at this, some ideas, maybe some really big ideas that are in the master plan for aging and will come out, is this number one thing is creating partnerships with the disability community. Two distinct populations, two distinct needs, sometimes, often one and the same, both in terms of older adults having disabilities and in terms of services meeting both populations. We all need to get from point A to point B. That is not unique to aging, it's not unique to disability. So having accessible services is a reality of what we have and how we progress. I think going back to that first slide, one of the biggest things on here and most innovative and important is no wrong door to services and aging and disability resource connections, which are kind of the same concept. Navigating that spider web that we started with is just crazy. So how do we solve that? And the idea has been bandied about for decades that we need to pull all of those programs together, put them under one division, one department, and make everything seamless. I agree with that, but the reality of getting there, I think, is just impossible. There's too many different players. There's too many turf wars. There's too many structural differences to providing in-home services, to providing socialization, to providing connectivity, to providing healthcare. Those barriers and those silos are there. We can do the most we can to break it down, but there's only so far we're going to get in any reasonable amount of time. And I would actually put forth that the different silos in many ways are a strength, that we don't necessarily want them to disappear, because aging is not one issue. It's not just about healthcare. Healthcare is part of it, but there's a social element, there's a spiritual element Kathy was talking about earlier, there's housing, there's transportation, there's poverty, there's access to information, hunger, bridging digital divide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with such a complex problem, and I don't even want to say problem, I think that that's part of the problem, is calling aging a problem, because it can be really a wonderful experience in many ways. But it's far too complex to put in one box or one silo. And I think it's actually to our advantage that all these different elements of the community have a different piece and different role to play. And we're not going to make any progress with any major social issue if only one entity is charged with trying to address that. So as much as those first couple slides drive me crazy, they also give me great hope. And it's one of the things I also like about Master Plan for Aging, is that there are some efforts to streamline those silos, but the key element is that it is a partnership with all the cabinet levels of the state. So we're seeing everyone have some ownership. Housing is a big piece of this. Poverty is a big piece of it. Access to services, bridging the digital divide is huge. So while too many silos are certainly a problem, I would put forth that too few silos would be an equal problem. Hopefully what we can do is focus on no wrong door services, on getting people connected wherever they ask for help. And my vision is actually that we get great system navigators that either know how to get from point A to point B in your life, or in your need for services, or connecting socially, or whatever it is, and that either the first person you contact with is that great navigator, or they know how to find the navigator for you to use. And it's not going to be, one single navigator. There's going to be multi-pronged systems. But having somebody that can coordinate that and streamline the services, I think, is doable, reasonable, and critical. Somebody should be able to call and say, I need help for my parent, or I need help getting to the store. I can't shop anymore. What can I do? And not get referred or bounced to 6 or 7 agencies, but have one person say, let's talk, let's hear what your situations are, and let's figure out the solutions to all this. And actually, this is one of the things that I think Lifespan is great about. I'll do a blatant pitch, because I think it's an important role that any care entity plays. So just to wrap up, and I know I'm pretty far under time, but maybe we can have some Q&A. And this is kind of a new thing for me to put this out there. Is a fragmented system really good or bad? And like most things, it's not all or nothing. There's good aspects to the fragmentation. There's obviously bad ones, but let's see how we can turn this into a positive. And I think the key to that is the next statement on here. And that's, if we build a system around the individual, this isn't a new thought, person-centered care, we've all heard it many times, but making a system person-centered rather than system-centered is going to be our key to success. Too often, even while people are saying this, the next statement is how their system is person-centered more than something else. So everybody should use their system of care. And that's the inherent problem. Everyone wants their system to be the one that works, or honestly, the one that gets all the money or resources. So we need to break away from that mindset. We need to say that lots of silos is a good thing, that we need to just make sure we can connect effectively people needing services with the services that are out there available. And then, of course, everything else falls into place. Services have to be available. They have to be adequate. They have to be accessible. They have to be equitable in serving distinct populations. So that's my spiel. I'd love thoughts or questions on this. The official website for Master Plan for Aging is here. It's Together We Engage. The URL is pretty straightforward. You can Google Master Plan for Aging. You can Google Together We Engage, or just go to www.engageca.org.
Terrific presentation, Clay. Thank you so much for your thoroughness and bringing to us, those that may not have heard of the Master Plan for Aging, some insight into its reality that it has become. And I'm, again, just super grateful that I live in a state that is concentrating areas on aging, where a lot of our nation, again, it dismisses the aging process and doesn't put plans into place rather than have to put out fires as they develop. I think we may have a question. Actually, somebody would like for you, if possible, to display the very first slide again, the periodic table. That was an awesome slide too, by the way.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to that one here. I'm trying to find where I put it. And so
the web of resources that's on that slide you're showing right now, I mean, that's just how complicated and complex navigating a system can be, where a care manager like Lifespan offers to our older adult community can help navigate some of those services.
So your tech support, which is me, is failing miserably on this. So I can send that slide out. I'm having trouble getting back to it. Oh, wait a minute.
Thanks for your patience, everybody.
Yeah, apologies for being incompetent.
We're running a little ahead of time, so you're good, Clay.
Here we go. All right, let's see if we can get this back up here.
There it is. And I'm wondering, the person that requests the slide, is there a question you have specifically regarding the periodic table you're seeing, or did you just want to take a look at it one more time? While we're waiting for a response to my question, Clay, something came up to me that I thought might be nice if you could address this. My hope is that there is something inclusive within the master plan for aging in the language, but can you speak to any specificity about language specific to older adults who identify as LGBTQ?
I can. That was a big part that we tried to integrate throughout the plan, was just the issue of equity. And equity, the focus areas there were ethnic and social backgrounds, obviously LGBTQ populations, people with disabilities was a big part of it. And what we tried to do was create a work group addressing nothing but equity, and then the equity work group took their values and wove them through all the different work groups and made sure they were inclusive in terms of their plans and who were being served. So I was pretty happy to see that take place, and I think it will be pretty obvious in the draft plan. The draft plan is not out. There is a summary which is available at the Together We Engage website, and that does talk about equity a bit.
Outstanding. Thank you very much for clarifying that for us, Clay. The individual that requested the periodic table said they're new to senior support and want to become a better navigator. Applause, applause, applause to you in senior support. Thank you for what you are doing now and what you will continue to do to support our older adult community. Another question, if you can answer this, how is the County of Santa Cruz coming on board with this? Is there any buy-in by our county? Is there any movement within our leadership here?
There's some, and I expect there to be quite a bit more in the coming months. Part of the challenge right now is there's not a written document to present or share. So the county doesn't have anything to embrace or react to. They will have that soon. One of the things the county does, and I'm really grateful of the county and the city, is our agency has an advisory council that's made up of an elected official from each city and 2 from the Board of Supervisors. So the Board of Supervisor appointees are Bruce McPherson and Greg Caput, and they attend. They're at each meeting. Historically, with a lot of committees, electeds will staff these things out or find a citizen rep. But in this case, our supervisors are there monthly, and this is an item that they're interested in. So we'll have continued discussions going on there. Related to that a little bit is the effort to create age-friendly communities. And the city of Watsonville is actively trying to develop a age-friendly community plan. The County of Santa Cruz is gathering information about best models. And again, our AAA Advisory Council has been pushing this issue for 18 months now, and has gotten a fair amount of traction with other cities. So it's not being ignored.
Terrific. And I know you're such a staunch advocate for all things aging, Clay. It's such a blessing to have you amongst many people in our community that are advocating for the needs of our older adults. I also wonder if you could mention, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I wonder if you could speak to really briefly, because we have a little bit of time here and folks might be interested, especially in light of COVID-19 and the increased isolation and of our older adults because of the pandemic. I understand that you and many other community partners are involved in a senior isolation work group that is making some traction in potentially recreating or reevaluating or improving services more on a virtual basis. Would you be willing to speak to that for just a few minutes?
I would love to, and it's actually in my notes to make sure I talk about this a bit. So loneliness and isolation has always been a challenge for older adults, for the entire population, but especially for older adults and people with disabilities. And over the last year or 2, we've been pushing a lot to get some traction on this topic. When COVID hit, it just went through the roof, just exponentially hit hard. And some of our most successful solutions or mitigations are kind of gone right now. Like volunteerism is one of the best things anybody can do to stay vibrant and vital and connected with our community. So we were, loving all the volunteer programs for seniors that exist in our community and kind of holding them up as landmark examples of how to stay engaged. Now that is taken away also. So we've got this population of super involved and engaged seniors who suddenly are back to square one in terms of isolation. And what do we do about that? So we've been since, it's been almost 2 years now, we held a solution summit and talked about loneliness and isolation as one of the tasks we wanted to address. It did result in the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History holding a We're Still Here exhibit for many months, talking about that very topic and trying to develop new ways to connect. So that group is trying to develop exactly that issue. What do we do to keep seniors active and engaged? And we're recognizing that bridging the digital divide is a huge piece of it. Friendly phone caller programs are a huge piece of it. One of the great things, and you won't, how often do you hear this? But one of the great things that's happened with COVID is attention to this issue, acknowledgement that it exists, and actually some dollars being put forward to address it. So we're trying to roll out various ways to connect seniors digitally or in person or via the phone. We're shifting some of our volunteer programs that we have, as is the Volunteer Center, to engage seniors more wholly. But what I really want to say is that in one of the earlier meetings of this work group, Kathy Kress, she kept dropping my name all day, so she's getting some of it back. But Kathy and Pam Arnsberger is currently the president of my board. Both of them started raising the issue. Well, in the UK, they actually have a minister of engagement or a minister of loneliness that addresses keeping seniors connected. Why don't we have something like that in the US? So we kicked that around, and the answer is, well, why don't we? We need to have this. And it's certainly a way to move this issue forward. So as the pandemic hit and as CARES Act dollars in particular came forth, that conversation just expanded. And we took it every place we could locally and statewide. And it's actually one of the components that's in Master Plan for Aging, is that California create a minister of engagement or a director of loneliness, whatever they want to call it, and that this be funded as an ongoing position. The great news is that last month, California Department of Aging actually created the position, and they're currently recruiting somebody to work at a state level to address loneliness and isolation and increase senior engagement. So that'll include all the traditional ways to connect with somebody, promoting things like Alexa devices, getting rural internet connectivity, getting somebody that just makes a phone call to a friend or loved one, or even somebody they don't know, in order to make sure that engagement happens. And creating, think about, if you're isolated and you're craving connectivity, how many people are out there that would be willing to call somebody else and actually contribute to solving the problem? So I'm super excited about this. And, I think we're going to have great results from it. Kathy deserves huge kudos for bringing it up. Pam does too, and for, talking about it and moving forward. And the other thing, and this goes back to my broken record of telling everybody, get engaged, ask for the things you think should happen, or think creatively and ask other people about them. This is proof that it doesn't take a high-powered politico or a wealthy person to make things happen. It can just be a couple people looking at a problem and asking the question, how can we make this better? And have that dialogue and that discussion. And, most of the time, nothing will come of it. But sometimes we have a whole new statewide position to address this topic. And this is one of those examples. So high five, Kathy.
Yeah, always, Kathy, another staunch advocate for everything older adult. We're waiting for our next presenter to come by, but we've got a few more minutes, so I don't see anybody else posing questions. Hold on, I have one on the chat function. So Francie wants to know, is there any serious conversation about consolidating programs that serve older adults and persons with disabilities under fewer state level agencies? Big question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I got that one. There is, and where that goes is hard to say. The positive side of it, I mentioned aging and disability resource centers. There's a lot of momentum for creating no wrong door systems for people with disabilities or older adults and integrating those services together. There's about 7 agencies piloting this in the state right now, and there's another 8 that are emerging ADRCs that are trying to develop a similar project. We're one of the agencies doing that. Our effort is in San Benito County right now, and our partners are Central Coast Center for Independent Living. ADRCs are by definition a partnership between an area agency on aging, which is what the Seniors Council does, and an independent living center. So that's probably the most exciting trend that has operational support, that has legislative support, and has things like Master Plan for Aging getting behind it. There's always other ideas out there. Some are seen as threats and some are seen as progressive. For example, right now, there is a discussion about AAA's 2.0. And just to do the short version, AAA, Area Agency on Aging, every place in the US has an area agency on aging. That's part of the Older Americans Act, which was passed during the Johnson administration. So these are longstanding concepts. AAAs receive state and federal dollars and figure out how to deliver services to people age 60 and above. It's not means tested, it's more needs tested, but it's focused on keeping all older adults healthy and vibrant. So in California, there are currently 33 AAAs. Seniors Council is the AAA of Santa Cruz and San Benito counties. So there is a proposal that instead of there being 33 AAAs, that there become 58 AAAs, that every county have their own, that regional AAAs be split up and put under individual counties, which doesn't make a lot of sense in rural communities. You can't have effective county departments that have just a minuscule amount of funding. So that'll be an interesting dialogue. It's just getting underway. I don't know where that's going to end, but it's certainly out there and certainly a concern. I don't know that either of our counties would want to go in that direction. Both counties have been very supportive of our agency, and I do think the public-private partnership that we have is the best approach. But things like that are out there. They're certainly being kicked around. Honestly, when that proposal was put forth, it was pre-COVID, the economy was booming, and it looked like there was going to be a lot of money available to be put in aging services. That's a very different reality now. So I wonder how much enthusiasm there actually is for changing the structure at this point.
Right.
So I don't want to harp on that too much, because I think the real news and the real movement is around aging and disability resource centers, which does that kind of system navigation that I was talking for earlier. And that has very little opposition. I don't know that anyone thinks that's not a good approach or direction to go.
Agree wholeheartedly. So finally, just one last thing, the senior isolation work group that we discussed or talked about just a moment ago, if folks that are watching our webinar today want to become involved, is it too late? And if it's not, how do they do that?
The best thing for them to do would probably be to email me directly and see about next steps. It hasn't been to date a citizen group, but we are looking at how to not so much how to engage the community in terms of connecting digitally or connecting through phone systems, etc. So as that comes together, we'd love to have outreach components, and we do have some key partners in making that happen, where we can, part of all this is, what do you roll out next? How do you roll out how to stay connected? And it is a thing that we're working on. We don't want to roll out that offer without having a place for people to connect. So that's, if you're hearing some hesitancy in terms of welcoming everybody, that's why.
Fair enough, fair enough. And as always, any further updated information that you have available, Clay, just feel free to share it with us. And we'll make sure the community gets connected if and when that opportunity arises. But there are many other opportunities, folks, out there in the community to support our older adult communities. So please, check in with your local resources like Senior Network Services, the Seniors Council, and other agencies that support older adults. So thanks again to Clay for your amazing presentation, your time in sharing with us today, despite challenges that you've been experiencing. From the bottom of my heart and Lifespans, we appreciate you and are grateful for you to be in our community.
Thank you much. Again, a pleasure and honor to be here.
Thank you. All right, we are beginning to wrap up our day, but our final presenter of today is Dr. Art Dover, who has been practicing primary care medicine in Santa Cruz County since 1975. Dr. Dover has traveled extensively and resided in Latin America. He is a diplomate of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a member of the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and the International Society of Travel Medicine. His presentation today will examine and talk about the intersection of COVID-19 and the flu season. We are so grateful to have Dr. Dover with us today, so please help me virtually welcome Dr. Dover to the Zoom room. Welcome, Doctor.
Thanks for asking me to speak with you. A little background information. We're having some remodeling done in the house, so you might hear some percussion, and there's disorder behind me. So I'm going to try to share my slideshow with you. And I might need some help from this.
So bottom of your Zoom, there, you're getting it.
Okay, now. I think maybe all these people here are on top of my link.
No, it should be showing there. I don't know what the title of it is.
Here we go.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
Yeah, probably just expand that screen so it's the only thing showing and you'll be in good shape. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, so I'm going to start going over influenza with you all because we can do something about this right now. So let me get people out of the way here. Influenza comes from an Italian word, and it is not your common cold. It's very different. And like COVID, it's highly contagious as a respiratory disease. This one occurs every year and it's worldwide. So where does it come from? Most of the time it comes from this part of the world. And why? It's because of the close interactions people have with birds and pigs, large groups of these animals. These animals suffer from influenza viruses just as we do. So the new strains come out of involvement with these animals. This year's strains, there are two types of flu. Type A, there are two of them from China. Type B, there's one labeled Thailand, probably came from Thailand. The Washington one, I don't know the origin of that name, but it did not start in Washington. I think that's where it was identified. So what are the symptoms? This is a lot like COVID. So what we're talking about actually is the possibility of a twindemic, COVID and seasonal influenza. So these are typical symptoms of influenza down to here. COVID, of course, affects a lot more symptoms than influenza. And people have a lot of misinformation about influenza. It is a significant disease. CDC reported over 35 million illnesses last year, 165 million medical visits. And this is something that often overwhelms our medical systems. 500,000 hospitalizations, another overwhelming factor, and 34,500 deaths reported. And you know, with COVID right now, we're up well over 200,000 deaths in the US in a period of about 7 months. So there's a distinct difference there. Now, I have to change my slide. I don't know how to do that. Here we go. You don't want that one. So here are some comparisons of the two illnesses. They're both carried by droplets and aerosols, so it's airborne. Similar initial symptoms, may be very confusing, may last days or weeks. Pneumonia is a very common complication with both of the illnesses. And one difference here is that the pneumonia with COVID often causes permanent damage to the lungs. Influenza, generally not so. Most people get over it. And here, this is serious, not serious. Both of these illnesses are much more of a problem for people with underlying disease. With both of these illnesses, children are much less commonly affected than adults. So the differences are, as I said, influenza seasonally is usually much less deadly. We have had some spectacular new strains. We had the swine flu, if you may remember, and we had a bird flu threat. It actually hasn't happened yet. Flu is less contagious. It's seasonal. Usually starts up in the autumn period, and by March, it's petered out. Influenza is primarily an infection of the lung. There are occasional disruptions with the brain, causing encephalitis, but that's very uncommon. The complications with influenza are usually the secondary bacterial infections. That can be a problem with COVID, but COVID itself causes terrible damage to the lungs. A big difference in this, and I want you all to pay attention to this, we have safe and effective vaccines for influenza readily available. The community is starting to immunize now. And there's a big reason for doing this. With COVID already burdening our healthcare systems, having an influenza epidemic or pandemic is going to overwhelm all of our medical systems. So what we can do is get at least some help from a vaccine. And then another big difference is we have medications for influenza to be used beforehand for people who, for some reason, cannot take the vaccine, and there are very few, or they can be used after an exposure for those people or at the very onset of symptoms. So let's try for another slide. So prevention for both of these, masks, this is essential. This is science. Please do not pay attention to the politicians about this. This is a very simple preventive measure. You may have heard some of the amazing numbers about the illnesses prevented and deaths prevented with COVID just by wearing a mask. Now, I like the word physical distancing instead of social. We don't want to be separated from people socially, except in a physical way. It's important to maintain relationships with others, but we don't need to get up close. So we can be social and distanced, and that's physical, okay? Hand washing also is an important factor. But remember, both of these diseases primarily are airborne. So your mask and distancing are important. We all probably have heard the number 6 feet apart. Unfortunately, with aerosols, I've seen videos of sneezes that create an aerosol that goes 27 feet. So getting as far away from people as you can, especially indoor situations, is important. And then pre-season vaccination. Again, this is time to be vaccinating for influenza before we actually have an epidemic. So vaccine, dispose of your tissues safely, and prescriptions should be necessary if necessary. So there are some immune boosters that have been touted. Rest and exercise is very important for everybody. And there's some immune enhancers that have been shown to make a difference with our immune systems. Vitamin D, this is very basic. And because we are not out in the sun very much anymore, and we're told sunshine is not good for us, we all need to be taking vitamin D every day. And it's a higher dose for people over 60 years of age. If you remember Linus Pauling, he said vitamin C is a great preventive. Unfortunately, you have to take very large doses and you have to do it daily. Zinc is an infection modulator. There are some zinc preparations on at the pharmacies. One of them I like is called Cold Ease. It's a lozenge that you suck on and you get some zinc that way. And then melatonin is said to be helpful as well. I can't tell you how. So we get a new vaccine every year. Why? Waning immunity. The immunity we get from our vaccine lasts about 6 months, maybe a little bit beyond that, but not as powerful. There are changes in the strains that we expect to have come through each year, so we need new vaccines. And then there are two typical behaviors of the virus itself. One is called antigenic shift. That's where some of the binding sites on the capsule move by going through populations. And then the other one is spontaneous mutation. So this is the reason why the vaccines that are prepared 6 months in advance of expected need may not cover 100%, but they generally give partial immunity at least. And I have to tell you here, I had Hong Kong flu in 1968, and it was horrible. Ever since then, I've had a flu vaccine every year. Practicing pediatrics, there were days when I had 40 people with flu and cough in my face, but I had the vaccine. I never came down with the flu. All those 32 years of having children and their adult providers cough on me, and this is a closed space in my clinic every day, including the weekends, sometimes at nights. I never came down with the flu. So I think the vaccine is a very worthwhile proposition for everybody. And I have to tell you an anecdote. I did see adults in the practice. One of them had a very memorable report of his experience with flu with me. He sat down, he had droopy eyes, he looked very dejected. He said, "Doc, I feel like I'm gonna die. Everything hurts. My hair hurts. My teeth hurt. I hurt all over." And that was just the first day of the flu. He didn't have the painful cough yet. So this is memorable illness for people. So as far as vaccines go, what's new is that there's just a single dose for children instead of half dose a month apart. There's a delay of 6 months in the vaccine production, and that's why we don't always have something that matches the virus that actually reaches our shores. Go for the quadrivalent vaccine. The trivalent misses protection for one of the strains. There's an intranasal vaccine. It's called FluMist. I stopped ordering it. It's a little complicated. First, it was designed for use in children because of their fear of needles. It's limited in application only up to age 46. It can't be given to anyone with asthma or who can't take a live virus vaccine. So this is for the needle-shy adults, but I found so few of them that I stopped ordering it. Most of the vaccines now are free of mercury and other preservatives, so you check with your provider. And there are some vaccines that are not prepared in chicken eggs. One of them is called Flublok. So time for some questions, and then I'll have a little bit more of fun with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dover, for your informative presentation about influenza versus COVID. And I also want to just say I appreciate you using the term physical distancing. I've also adopted that myself because social distancing has, in my opinion, just an internal negative impact on people.
Indeed.
I still want to be near folk if I can, of course, physically distanced appropriately. And honestly, the sneeze that you talked about with the 27-foot radius or range, that concerns me. No matter how far you are away from somebody, stay out of their sneeze range for sure. Any questions from the audience? I think I may have one coming up. Here's one for you, Dr. Dover. What type of physical reasons would cause a person to not be able to take the flu vaccine?
Someone who has an immune issue needs to get the killed vaccine without mercury, the Flublok. There actually are no physical reasons to not the vaccine other than history of Guillain-Barré, which is a very unusual immune response to many vaccines, not just flu vaccine. And it also occurs in people without any prior vaccine. So that's the main reason. Egg allergy, of course, is a reason to avoid the vaccine that's prepared in egg. And then anyone who's ever had a severe reaction to a flu vaccine other than Guillain-Barré should not get the vaccine, but consider getting Tamiflu to have on hand in case they come down with symptoms of flu when the season starts.
Great, thank you, doctor. Someone in the audience, Sue, just made a comment that zinc was warned in this series, I'm not sure which series she's speaking of, as hard on the esophagus. Any comments on that?
I have no information about that, but Sue, Arlene Noodleman is speaking to our Rotary Club at 12:30 today, and she's speaking about these measures. So she'll give you a good answer for that.
Great to know. Great to know. Thank you. Kathy said, I tried getting a flu vaccine at Walgreens. They said there was 2. They said that they were all out of the accelerated and I can only have the senior vaccine. Which should I take?
If you're over 65, you want the senior vaccine, which is 4 times the strength of what the younger folks get. There is a shortage right now of the senior vaccines. They're supposed to be shipping towards the end of the month. If you're over 65, I think it's worthwhile to wait for the greater protection. If you're eager, take the one that's available now, but then you wouldn't get the senior one. Medicare will pay for one only.
Great. Thank you, doctor. Circling back to Sue's comment, thank you, Sue, for bringing that up. That was Dr. Landsberg who spoke on the zinc issue yesterday. Appreciate my little ghosts out there telling me that's where it came from. So thank you for that. We also have a question from Becky. Does the flu vaccine cause the flu? or cause flu-like symptoms or side effects.
Okay, that's my lead into what I wanted to have some fun with, if I can get my screen up again.
Can I ask what island that is that's on your screen real quick? Side topic?
No, no,
Okay.
courtesy of, what's her name? Apple. No, it says I'm screen sharing, but I don't believe it.
You are. I see your screen.
You do, I don't. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're going to talk about flu skeptics. The vaccine gives me the flu. This is the traditional flu skeptic. It's a kill vaccine. It cannot give you influenza. It is impossible to get flu from the influenza vaccine. Okay, you ready for more?
Let me just go a little bit more on that one for you. What about symptoms? I've had many people say they felt fatigued or feverish after doing it. Can it cause symptoms at all, even though it may not be exactly flu?
I think it's possible that someone has some sensitivity to something in that vaccine, but it's not influenza. And there's also a chance of some other illness coming along at the time of receiving the vaccine or shortly afterwards. So we can't sort that out. We know that it does not cause the flu.
So you can't get the flu, but potentially some symptoms depending on who you are.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Ready for
Before
more?
we move on to more fun, Kathy had wanted to say, do you know which vaccine Medicare pays for?
They'll pay for the one that your pharmacy or physician has. They pay for the senior vaccine. They will pay for the junior vaccine if you choose to do that before the senior vaccine is available. And they will not pay for the intranasal one if you happen to find it.
Okay, perfect. I think I've got all the questions from the sidebar. So if you want to have some more fun with us, Dr. Dover, you've got some time.
I sure do. Okay. I received the flu vaccine and I got the flu anyway. This is what we call an inexact skeptic. The vaccine is not perfect and you may have indeed had the flu. More likely, you labeled one of the many respiratory viruses people get each year as the flu. Remember, there are hundreds of potential causes of circulating respiratory infection. The flu vaccine only covers influenza, the virus most likely to kill you and yours. Here's another one. This is the superstitious, pre-modern, magical thinking skeptic. What is there to believe in? Belief is what you do when there is no data. Probably don't believe in gravity or germ theory either. Everyone, I suppose, has to believe in something, and I believe I will have a beer.
Very good, Dr. Dover.
We have time for more.
Go ahead. Yeah, you've got some more time.
The vaccine is worse than the disease. This skeptic is the wimp. What a combination. Your mother must be proud. Unless you think a sore deltoid muscle for a day is too high a price to pay to prevent 2 weeks of high fevers, severe aches, and intractable cough, then that's your choice. Here's another one. I had the vaccine last year, so I do not need it this year. This is the uneducated skeptic. Each year, new strains of influenza circulate across the world. Last year's vaccine at best provides only partial protection. Every year you need a shot. And in my own personal experience, all those previous years gave me very good protection since 1968. So I'm a believer. I will not pass up on the vaccine. And I urge it for everybody for very simple, safe protection, along with your mask, physical distancing, and hand washing.
Excellent.
No,
I have a question. Sorry, doctor, may I ask a question?
of course.
So how do they determine what strain of influenza will be circulating if they're doing it 6 months in advance? Is that what did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Good question. This is information gained from researchers in South and Southeast Asia to see what the birds, the pigs, and the people are suffering from at that time. And then a committee sits down and a lot of coffee, a lot of time, they decide which are the most likely strains to reach our shores. And sometimes they're off for many reasons. It may be in the selection of what's busy at the time in South and Southeast Asia. It may be because of the shifting of the antigens on the virus capsule, or a frank mutation in the genetics of the virus.
Fascinating. So I guess my follow-up question to that, or maybe it's just a comment. So the folks that are residing in Southeast Asia, where the potential influenza strain is coming from, are they out of luck? They're just going to get it, and then we are lucky on this side of the continent?
Hopefully their laboratories are putting together a vaccine for them as well. But what comes here is based on what's going on there. And I also should mention the Southern Hemisphere has a reverse flu epidemic schedule. Their winter there is the opposite of our winter here. So protection is needed for going south later on in our springtime.
Great, thank you. So any other questions from the audience? I've got something. Here's one that came in from Daryl. Daryl read today that since everyone is wearing masks, the flu is down 90% in the Southern Hemisphere. Do you still need to get a shot?
Everyone needs to get the shot. You can't count on the mask being 100% effective. There are many, many breaks in the mask procedures and the distancing. And don't forget, we're going in the cold weather. We're going to be in indoor spaces with dry, heated air and very poor air circulation. So wearing a mask indoors may not be much in the way of protection.
Great, thank you very
That's
much.
why we have flu outbreaks, especially wintertime. It's coming. And that's why our scientists are saying that we're likely to have a big increase in COVID cases because of winter. It's being indoors and heated air, close quarters.
And on the COVID-19 note, Dr. Dober, we've recently seen a person in particular who was able to receive groundbreaking and experimental or whatnot treatment for COVID-19 and is professing to say it's a blessing from his deity. I'm curious, is there anything moving for the general public like myself or you, or that would be helpful towards treating COVID-19 symptoms that are not severe?
No, much of what was done for and with person one is not available to the public.
So with that said, well, it's all experimental. I won't ask you to make conjecture or anything like that. I appreciate your transparency though, because that's, the reality for most of us is we will rely on mask wearing, physical distancing, hand washing, hand sanitizer. If you can't wash your hands is a good standby. Just make sure it's a good one. There are many not so good ones out there, according to the CDC. So we're actually getting out of time here, Dr. Dober. No other questions. Do you have any final comments for us as we move into the flu season and battling COVID at the same time?
Yeah, it's very simple. Listen to scientists. Do not pay attention to what the politicians are saying. Many of them are very confused. They're speaking false information. I don't know what their agenda is, but it's not healthy for our country.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. really appreciate you taking time to be with us today, and really just grateful for you and your presence in our community.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. So that wraps up today's event and Lifespan's webinar premiere. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentations, and I'd like to offer another round of thanks and gratitude to all of our guests over the past 2 days. Jamie Cabral, Dr. Elizabeth Landsberg, Tawny Hamill, Francie Newfield, Lynn Knutson, Sally Bookman, Kathy Kress, Vanessa Silverstein, Clay Kempf, and ultimately Dr. Art Dover, albeit by virtual means. Thank you all for your presence and sharing what we can do to help support our older adults and to remember to remain optimistic and hopeful for aging. On behalf of Lifespan, we would also like to thank each of you for joining us and want you to know that we appreciate you so much being here. We look forward to offering additional webinars in the future, so please stay tuned. To officially wrap up our Living Your Best Life, Aging Well with Resilience webinar, I would like to welcome Lifespan's Chief Operating Officer, Ashley Min.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending again today. You've reached the end of day 2. For those of you who joined us both days, kudos to you for spending the mornings with us and educating yourselves. I hope that you gained something and are walking away with some newfound knowledge. I can't express thanks enough to our presenters. I sure learned a lot over the past 2 days, and it was just enjoyable. It was a change of pace for all of us, and really informative. So thank you. Again, this is our first ever virtual event, and I have to say I'm incredibly proud right now. Our team has worked very hard over the course of the last couple of months in putting this together. And Stephen, for sure, is in his element. He has done a fantastic job over the course of the last 2 days. For those of you who didn't join us yesterday, I'll quickly introduce myself again. I'm Ashley Min. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Lifespan and have been with this fantastic agency for 6 years. Lifespan is now well into its 37th year. And just as life gets better with age, Lifespan does too. We are having to pivot, as most businesses are, in terms of how to continue to provide services and outreach efforts in a different way. So again, you know, I imagine that this is only the first of many events that we'll host virtually. I also invite you to check out our website and our services. We touched on well-being, care management, and of course we've got fantastic home care hours with incredible, well-trained, licensed, registered caregivers. So please, if there's any questions you may have in terms of our services and what we can offer and how we can benefit you, we are always getting creative with how we're working with clients and their families in the community. So reach out if you've got questions. And I'll just wrap this up by, again, thanking all of our presenters. I hope that our audience found something worthwhile during their time with us. And I also really would like to encourage you guys to reach out, participate in the surveys that will come following the event, and let us know if there's any topics of conversation that you would like to discuss. We're already in talks with having some panelist calls and Q&As so that people can get more information about aging and the resources that are in our community in Santa Cruz and California, and also nationwide. So again, thanks all, and we'll give you a few minutes back into your day. And as we go into the weekend, I hope you guys all stay safe, healthy, and happy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Thank you again, everybody, for coming.